Tonight, we venture into the Viking world, not the myth, but the stark reality. Imagine awakening around 870 AD, not to comfort, but to the constant, gentle rocking of timber on water. This is a Viking longship, a setting far removed from popular tales of epic battles and fearsome warriors out of legend. The immediate sensations are cold, and dampness penetrating the air and the rough materials beneath you. You lie on what feels like coarse straw and stiff animal hides, likely resting directly on the ship's hard wooden planks. A heavy, thick wool blanket provides minimal insulation. Dim, murky light filters from above, revealing the close confines. The air is thick, dense with the smells of damp wood, the sharp, pungent odor of pine tar waterproofing the hull, mingled with the close proximity of unwashed human bodies, stale sweat, and lingering traces of fish and wood smoke. Sounds register, the rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers flexing, the soft snores and rustling movements of numerous others sleeping incredibly close by, the slap of cold waves against the hull mere inches away. Attempting even a small stretch results in immediate contact, bumping a leg clad in rough wool, hitting the hard edge of a carved wooden sea chest. This is the reality. Inescapable proximity, shared air, textures, and the pervasive damp cold. The day has barely begun. Experiencing this awakening here on board, let's examine the vessel itself, the longship. Look around you, or rather, feel around you in the dim light. This vessel, it's perhaps not what you were picturing. Think less of a towering galleon or a sturdy modern ferry, and more of a very long, elegantly shaped, oversized canoe designed for the sea. Feel the wood beneath your hands, beneath the thin layer of straw or hides you might be lying on. It's likely oak or pine, rough-hewn in places, worn smooth in others by the passage of countless hands and bodies. Run your fingers along the side of the hull, if you can reach it. You'll feel overlapping planks, one layer fixed over the edge of the one below it. This is what's called clinker-built, or lapstrake construction. It creates distinctive ridges running the length of the boat, giving it flexibility, but also meaning the surface isn't smooth like modern boats you might know. These overlapping planks are held together by iron rivets, thousands of them, clenched tight. You might feel the slight bump of a rivet head under your fingertips. This technique made the ships surprisingly light for their size, and flexible enough to ride the waves rather than just crashing through them, which was crucial for surviving the rough northern seas. But light and flexible also means it feels somewhat fragile beneath you, riding low in the water. Look up. There's no cabin, no enclosed deck offering shelter. You are essentially in an open boat. Above you, there's just the sky, gray and ominous, or perhaps starting to lighten with the dawn. Maybe a large, square woolen sail is furled on the central mast for now, or perhaps it's raised, catching the wind with a soft, flapping sound. But there are no walls, no roof beyond maybe a temporary awning rigged in desperation against rain, which wouldn't offer much real protection. You are completely exposed to whatever the sea and sky decide to throw at you. The shallow draft, meaning how little of the ship is actually underwater, was a huge advantage for the Vikings. It allowed them to navigate shallow rivers, land directly on beaches for raids or trade, appearing seemingly out of nowhere. For you, though, sitting low on the water, it enhances the feeling of vulnerability. The waves feel incredibly close, slapping against the hull just an arm's length away. You can hear the water rushing past, feel the spray when the wind picks up. Breathe in again, ignoring the human smells for a moment. Focus on the ship itself. There's the scent of the wood, damp and earthy. But overwhelming that is the sharp, pungent smell of tar. Tar was essential for waterproofing the ship, smeared into the gaps between planks coating the ropes. It's a thick, black, sticky substance derived from pine resin, and its powerful scent permeates everything. It gets on your clothes, on your skin, in your nostrils. It's the perfume of the longship, a constant reminder of the battle against the encroaching sea. This vessel is a masterpiece of naval architecture for its time and purpose. It's swift, versatile, capable of carrying warriors across vast distances. But as a place to live, day in, day out, for weeks on end, it's a different story. It offers no comfort, no shelter, no escape from the elements or your companions. It is a tool, a weapon, a means to an end. And right now, it's your entire world, a world made of rough wood, pungent tar, and constant, unnerving closeness to the cold water. Remember when you tried to stretch earlier and immediately bumped into something or someone. Let's explore that feeling because it's not going away. Personal space, that invisible bubble we cherish in the modern world, simply doesn't exist here. Forget having your own room or even your own bed. Here, on the longship, space is the ultimate luxury, and it's one afforded to absolutely no one. Imagine the deck of the ship, perhaps only 4 or 5 meters wide at its broadest point, which is about the width of a small living room. Now, picture 50, 60, maybe even 70 other people sharing that space with you. Day and night. There are benches for rowers, known as thwarts, running across the width of the boat. Between these, and in any available gap, people are crammed together. When it's time to sleep, which happens whenever exhaustion takes over or watches change, there's no rolling out a sleeping bag into a clear spot. You find a sliver of space on the hard deck planks, perhaps pull a part of a shared animal fur over you. Maybe lean back against one of the wooden sea chests that line the sides. These chests, they are important. Each crew member would typically have one. It's a sturdy wooden box holding all their worldly possessions for the voyage. Spare clothes if they were lucky, maybe some tools, their eating bowl and knife, perhaps a small personal treasure or two. These chests often doubled as rowing benches and were, in a very real sense, the only piece of territory a Viking could claim as exclusively their own on board. Everything else was communal, especially the space itself. So you might find yourself wedged between a rough wooden chest, digging into your back and the warm, breathing body of the person next to you. And you are close. So close you can smell the stale sweat on your neighbor's woolen tunic, hear the rhythm of their breathing, feel the warmth radiating from them, or perhaps the unsettling cold if they are soaked from spray or rain. There's no polite "excuse me" as you shift position. You simply adjust, inevitably jostling the person beside you who does the same in return. Sleeping becomes a communal tangle of limbs and rough blankets. There's no concept of turning away for privacy. If someone snores, coughs, or mutters in their sleep, they do it practically in your ear. Think about how you feel in a crowded elevator or on a packed train for a few minutes. That slight tension, the awareness of being too close. Now, imagine that feeling being your constant reality, 24 hours a day, for weeks. There's no escape. You can't retreat to a private cabin because there are none. You can't even stand up and walk around freely without carefully stepping over and around seated or sleeping bodies and gear. This constant, enforced proximity fundamentally changes social interaction. Arguments might flare quickly, but perhaps they are also resolved quickly or suppressed because there's simply nowhere to storm off to. Trust and tolerance become essential survival tools, just as much as an axe or a shield. You are bound together in this shared space, this shared discomfort. Any notion you might have of personal boundaries, of needing alone time to recharge, you have to discard it immediately. It's a way of thinking that belongs to a world of walls and doors and separate rooms, a world you've left far behind. Here, the collective, the crew, the shared experience in this cramped wooden shell is everything. Beyond the immediate human sounds and smells of your tightly packed companions, there's another layer of sensory input that defines life on the longship: the voice of the sea and the ship itself. Tune out the snoring and the shuffling for a moment and just listen. What does the North Atlantic, or perhaps the Baltic, sound like from an open boat? It's never truly silent. There's the constant rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers as the hull flexes and works against the waves. It's a sound like an old house settling but continuous, a wooden groaning that speaks of the immense stresses the vessel endures. You hear the ropes straining against the mast and rigging, a higher-pitched sound, sometimes a taut hum in strong wind, sometimes a sharper snapping noise as they adjust to the sail's pull or the ship's roll. These sounds become the background music to your existence, so constant you might stop consciously noticing them, but they are always there, reminding you of the forces at play. Then there are the sounds of the water, the gentle slap, slap, slap of small waves against the hull in calm weather, a hypnotic, almost peaceful sound. But when the wind picks up, it becomes a harsher, rushing noise, a constant hiss as the boat cuts through the water, punctuated by the louder crash and splash of larger waves hitting the bow or side. Spray flies inboard, and you hear the sizzle of it landing on the wood, on the sail, on you. If the crew is rowing, you add the rhythmic clunk and splash of the oars dipping into the water, the groan of the oarlocks, the grunted breaths of the rowers, a sound of pure, hard labor. And the wind. The wind is a character in itself out here. It might be a low moan through the rigging on a gray day, or a high-pitched tearing howl during a gale that seems to vibrate in your bones. It whistles around the edges of the sail, flaps the woolen fabric with sudden loud cracks like gunshots, and carries the cries of seabirds, gulls, terns, perhaps the deeper call of a gannet, sounds that can signal proximity to land, or just the vast emptiness of the ocean. Compared to the electronic hums, traffic noise, and insulated quiet of your modern world, this soundscape is raw, elemental, and completely inescapable. Now, let's reconsider the smells, focusing beyond the human element we've already touched upon. The dominant perfume, overriding almost everything else, is salt. The air itself tastes salty on your lips. The constant sea spray carries that sharp, clean, yet vaguely metallic scent deep into your nostrils. It infuses your clothes, your hair, your skin, even the food you'll eventually eat. You feel perpetually slightly sticky with it. Mingled with the salt is the ever-present aroma of tar, that pungent, smoky pine resin smell we mentioned, used to waterproof the wood. It's sharp, almost medicinal, and like the salt, it gets into everything. Then there's the smell of wet wool. Wool was the primary fabric for clothing and sails, and when it gets wet, which is often, it releases a distinct, heavy animal smell, vaguely like damp sheep. It's not necessarily unpleasant, just thick and constant. Depending on the ship's cargo or recent activities, you might catch the distinct odor of fish, perhaps drying fish hung from the rigging, or the lingering smell of bait or catches. And from the bottom of the boat, the bilge, the lowest point where water inevitably collects, comes a less romantic smell. It's the scent of stagnant seawater mixed with accumulated dirt, maybe spilled food or drink, creating a sour, musty odor that has to be periodically bailed out. These smells, salt, tar, wet wool, fish, bilge water, combined with the human scents, create a unique and potent atmosphere. It's the smell of survival at sea in the Viking Age. It's a smell that would cling to you long after you reached land. It's a smell utterly alien to your clean, sanitized modern life, and one your nose would likely never quite get used to. Being constantly surrounded by the sounds and smells of the sea is one thing. Being constantly subjected to its whims and its weather with almost no protection is another level of challenge entirely. Remember, there's no cozy cabin to retreat into on this longship. You are outside all the time. Let's start with the cold. Even in summer, the North Atlantic or the North Sea can be bitterly cold. The wind, whistling across the water, seems to cut right through whatever clothing you might possess. Imagine wearing your normal clothes, perhaps jeans, a sweatshirt, a light jacket. They would be soaked through by sea spray or rain within hours, maybe minutes. And wet clothing in a cold wind doesn't just feel unpleasant, it actively leaches heat from your body. You'd feel a deep, penetrating chill settling into your bones, a cold that makes your fingers ache, your teeth chatter, and your muscles stiffen. The Vikings had woolen clothing, often treated with lanolin, which is the natural grease from sheep's wool, offering some water resistance. But even that has its limits against persistent rain or waves washing over the side. You would learn very quickly that staying dry is almost impossible, and staying warm is a constant battle. Then there's the dampness itself. Even when it's not raining, the air at sea is heavy with moisture. Fog might roll in, thick and disorienting, clinging to everything with a cold, wet film. Condensation forms on every surface. Your bedding, your clothes, your hair. Everything feels perpetually slightly damp, clammy. It's a feeling that seeps into your spirit, making the cold feel even colder, making comfort seem like a distant memory from another life. Imagine trying to sleep while feeling cold and damp, night after night. It's utterly draining. When it does rain, or worse, sleet or hail, there's nowhere to hide. You might huddle together with others for shared warmth, pull your cloak tighter, try to turn your back to the driving wind and water, but you are going to get wet. Properly soaked. Rainwater might be collected for drinking, a small blessing, but mostly it just adds to the general misery, plastering your hair to your skull, running in cold trickles down your neck and back. And it's not just the cold and wet. What about the sun? On clear days, the sun beats down relentlessly. There's no shade on an open deck except perhaps the narrow shadow cast by the sail, which shifts constantly. The glare reflecting off the water can be blinding, causing headaches and making it difficult to see. And your modern skin, likely unused to such prolonged direct exposure, would burn quickly and painfully. Sunburn might seem like a minor annoyance now, but on a long voyage, raw, peeling skin becomes another source of constant discomfort, another distraction, another vulnerability, especially when combined with saltwater spray stinging the burn. Dehydration also becomes a serious risk under a hot sun, especially with limited fresh water supplies. Think of it like this. Imagine being forced to camp outside without a tent, wearing inadequate clothing for several weeks straight in unpredictable weather. Now, Put that campsite on a constantly moving rolling platform surrounded by cold water. That gives you some idea of the sheer physical endurance required just to exist on a longship voyage. It's a relentless, 24/7 exposure to the elements that would test the limits of anyone accustomed to the climate-controlled comfort of the modern world. Your body would be constantly fighting the cold, fighting the wet, fighting the heat, fighting the fatigue that comes from never being truly comfortable or rested. Now, let's talk about some of the less heroic, more visceral aspects of daily life confined to this moving plank stage. First, there's the motion itself. Longships were designed to be flexible, to ride the waves, which means they rolled, pitched, and yawed pretty much constantly unless the sea was exceptionally calm. For someone not accustomed to this, which definitely includes you, seasickness is not just a possibility. It's practically a certainty. Imagine that churning feeling in your stomach, the cold sweat, the dizziness, the overwhelming urge to empty your stomach. It's deeply unpleasant, weakening, and makes every other discomfort feel 10 times worse. And where do you go when this inevitably happens? There's no sick bay, no convenient bathroom. The only option is to lean precariously over the side of the ship, known as the gunwale, and contribute your stomach contents to the waves. It's a public, miserable experience, often shared by several others, especially early in a voyage. The crew might offer some rough sympathy, or perhaps just ignore you, having seen it all before. There were no effective remedies beyond eventually, hopefully, getting your sea legs, your body adapting to the constant motion. Until then, it's just another layer of misery to endure. Then there's the matter of keeping clean, or rather, not keeping clean. Fresh water, as we'll discuss more later, was a precious, strictly rationed commodity primarily for drinking. It certainly wasn't wasted on extensive bathing. Your idea of a daily shower? Forget it completely. Maybe, if you were lucky and it rained heavily, you could try to rinse some of the salt and grime off yourself. More likely, washing involved a quick, bracing splash of cold seawater scooped up in a bucket or over the side. Invigorating, perhaps, but it doesn't exactly leave you feeling fresh, and the salt residue left on your skin can be irritating. Teeth cleaning? Perhaps chewing on a twig if you had one. Soap? Not readily available in the form you know it. Laundry? Almost certainly not happening during the voyage itself. You wear the same rough woolen clothes day after day, week after week. They become stiff with salt, stained with food, sweat, and whatever else, and carry the rich bouquet of scents we've already touched upon. And because you're living in such close quarters, sharing bedding and hygiene is so rudimentary, you wouldn't be alone for long. You'd soon acquire some unwelcome travel companions. Lice and fleas were simply a fact of life for most people in this era, and on a crowded ship, they would thrive. Imagine the constant, irritating itch, the feeling of tiny things crawling in your hair or clothes, and having absolutely no effective way to get rid of them. It's another layer of persistent discomfort, another small torture contributing to the overall erosion of your modern sensibilities. Scratching becomes an unconscious, constant activity for everyone on board. Finally, the most basic human need, toilet facilities. Again, forget modern plumbing. On a longship at sea, the facilities were rudimentary in the extreme. Usually, it involved finding a suitable spot along the edge of the ship, bracing yourself against the roll, and relieving yourself directly into the ocean. Depending on the ship's design, there might have been a slightly more designated spot, perhaps near the stern, maybe with a basic screen for minimal privacy. but often it was simply a matter of going over the side. Consider the lack of privacy, the awkwardness, the potential slipperiness of the deck, especially in rough weather. It adds a whole new dimension of unpleasantness to a simple daily function. Sanitation, as you understand it, is centuries away. This is the unvarnished reality, stripped bare of any romance, just humans dealing with fundamental needs under incredibly basic and challenging conditions, having perhaps survived the initial shock of your environment, the seasickness, the crushing lack of space. Your body eventually signals its fundamental need for energy. Thoughts turn to food. But let me caution you now. Erase any images conjured by modern dining or even romanticized campfire feasts. Food on a longship voyage, especially across open water, was engineered for one purpose and one purpose only: preservation. Taste, variety, texture as you appreciate them. These were luxuries left ashore, perhaps non-existent even there by your standards. What awaits you is sustenance at its most brutally basic. Let's begin with the likely star of your daily menu: dried, salted fish. Picture rows upon rows of cod, ling, or similar whitefish, split open, perhaps headless, hanging on wooden racks somewhere on a windswept shore months before your voyage even began. They hang there for weeks, the cold northern air and sun slowly leaching out almost every drop of moisture, while coarse layers of salt are rubbed into the flesh, drawing out even more water and creating a protective, crystalline crust. The resulting product is less like fish as you know it, and more like a thin, stiff plank of protein, incredibly light for its size but hard as wood. When it's time to eat, you might be handed a chunk of this. Feel its rough, sandpaper-like surface, impregnated with salt crystals. It smells powerfully of fish, yes, but overlaid with an almost chemical sharpness from the sheer quantity of salt. To make it even remotely edible, it likely needs soaking. Imagine dropping your portion into a bucket of precious, perhaps stale, water or weak ale, leaving it for hours if possible. It might soften slightly, becoming tough and chewy rather than brittle, but the salt remains. It permeates every single fiber. When you take a bite, the overwhelming sensation isn't fish. It's pure, aggressive saltiness that makes your tongue tingle and your throat immediately cry out for water. Water that is, itself, strictly rationed. Your other likely staple is hardtack, the legendary ship's biscuit. Think of dough made from the simplest ingredients: coarse flour, water, maybe a little salt. Kneaded into dense slabs and baked, then baked again, perhaps multiple times at low heat, until it becomes virtually moisture-free. The goal is to create something that simply will not spoil easily. Pick up a piece. It feels heavy, dense, like a fired clay tile. Tap it against the wooden deck. It makes a distinct clack. Try to bite it directly, and you risk serious dental injury. Like the fish, it often requires soaking. Dunk it in your drink ration. Watch it grudgingly absorb the liquid, maybe turning into a soggy, slightly gritty mush. The taste: utter neutrality. It's neither sweet nor savory. It exists purely as calories, as stomach-filling bulk. And stored for weeks or months in damp barrels within the ship's hold, hardtack rarely traveled alone. You'd likely notice small dark specks, or perhaps tiny tunnels burrowing through your biscuit. Weevils. These small beetles and their larvae thrived in stored grain products. While perhaps viewed with grim acceptance by seasoned sailors as unavoidable, finding your primary carbohydrate source moving slightly would be, for you, a deeply unsettling experience. forcing a grim choice between discarding precious calories or consuming extra protein. Could there be anything else to break the monotony? Very occasionally, perhaps. There might be barrels of dried meat, mutton, goat, maybe even horse, preserved like the fish through heavy salting and drying until it resembles leather more than flesh. Chewing it requires significant effort and time. You might find tubs of skyr, or a similar fermented dairy product, thick and tangy like yogurt, providing different nutrients but also prone to spoiling relatively quickly. Maybe some dried peas, though boiling them requires that rare thing, a stable fire and spare water. But largely, your palate is confined to salt fish and hard bread. Meal after meal, day after day, week after week. Imagine the profound food fatigue setting in. Your taste buds, accustomed to a vast spectrum of flavors, sweet, sour, spicy, fresh, are bludgeoned into submission by salt and blandness. You'd start to dream, obsessively, about the simplest modern foods: an apple, crisp and juicy, a slice of soft, fresh bread, a warm, non-salty potato, a simple salad. The sheer lack of variety becomes a form of psychological torture. Eating transforms from a potential pleasure into a grim duty, something you force yourself to do purely for survival. Your appetite might wane, not from lack of hunger, but from sheer revulsion at the thought of another piece of salty fish or hard biscuit. And all this food, such as it is stored in barrels or chests, crammed into the damp, unhygienic confines of the ship, absorbing the ambient smells of tar, bilge water, and unwashed bodies. Keeping it even remotely protected from moisture, mold, and vermin is a constant, often losing battle. This isn't just eating. It's consuming fuel that has barely survived its own journey. Fuel you need to force down to survive yours. That intensely salty, preserved food inevitably creates a powerful, driving thirst, bringing us to perhaps the most critical and constantly monitored resource on board: fresh water, or rather, whatever liquid passes for fresh. In your world, clean, safe water flows effortlessly from taps, is readily available in bottles, chilled and filtered. Here, on this wooden vessel adrift on the vast, undrinkable ocean, every single drop of potable liquid is a treasure, heavy to transport, difficult to store safely, and guarded with immense care. Your lifeline is stored in stout wooden barrels, constructed from shaped staves, usually oak, bound tightly together with hoops of wood or iron. These barrels are marvels of cooperage for their time, but they are far from the inert, perfectly sealed containers you rely on today. Wood breathes, it absorbs flavors, and, crucially, it has seams. Even the tightest barrel might weep slightly, a slow, almost imperceptible loss, but one that adds up over a long voyage. More significantly, ensuring the barrels were scrupulously clean before filling was difficult. Any lingering bacteria inside, combined with warmth and time, could begin to multiply within the stored water. The wooden staves themselves impart a taste, sometimes a faint oaky note, other times a less pleasant resinous or even slightly musty flavor, depending on the wood and its previous contents. So, when it's time to draw water, imagine the scene. The heavy bung is pried from a barrel. What comes out isn't the clear, neutral liquid you expect. It might be slightly cloudy, perhaps with tiny flecks floating in it. Bring it to your nose, and instead of odorless purity, you might detect a faint staleness, a hint of the barrel's wood, or a slightly off, swampy smell if the water has begun to turn. And the taste: flat, lacking any crispness, carrying those woody or stagnant notes. It's likely ambient temperature, meaning cool if the weather is cold, but unpleasantly lukewarm if the sun has been beating down. It quenches the immediate dryness in your throat, but it offers little refreshment. Yet, this is the water you rely on to live. Because this stored water was often unreliable or unpalatable, Vikings, like many seafarers, frequently depended on fermented drinks. This primarily meant a type of weak ale. Don't imagine the robust beers of today. This ship's ale was likely brewed with a low alcohol content, perhaps only 1 or 2%. Its main advantages were that the boiling involved in brewing killed many microorganisms present in the original water source, and the alcohol offered slight preservative qualities, making it potentially safer to drink than stored water over long periods. It also provided some much-needed calories. What did it taste like? Probably quite different from barrel to barrel, perhaps thin, slightly watery, often with a noticeable sour tang from the fermentation process, and served at ambient temperature. Mead, fermented honey water, might also be aboard, offering more calories and sweetness, but honey was valuable, so it might be reserved for the chieftain or special occasions, or mixed sparingly. These drinks, too, were stored in wooden barrels, subject to the same issues of flavor absorption and potential spoilage. And whether it was water, ale, or mead, the supply was strictly limited and carefully managed. Picture ration time. Perhaps once or twice a day, a designated person dips a ladle or cup into the barrel under watchful eyes. You hold out your personal drinking horn or wooden cup, receiving your measured allowance, perhaps the equivalent of 2 or 3 modern glasses, maybe less. That has to last you until the next distribution. There's no going back for more. You likely drink it all immediately, feeling the liquid briefly soothe your parched throat, but the feeling of thirst often remains, a low, humming bass line beneath your other discomforts. This constant state of mild dehydration would be exacerbated by everything else. The incredibly salty food actively draws moisture from your system. Hard physical labor, rowing, bailing, hauling ropes, makes you sweat, losing precious fluids. Seasickness causes further fluid loss. You'd start to recognize the signs in yourself: a persistent dryness in your mouth and throat, lips feeling chapped even in damp air, perhaps a dull headache throbbing behind your eyes, a feeling of lethargy or dizziness, noticing your urine becoming darker and less frequent. These are signals your body is struggling, crying out for more liquid than is available. Every day, you'd be acutely aware of the water level in those barrels. You might see the crew measuring the depth, hear quiet discussions about how long the supply needs to last. A sense of underlying anxiety about this most fundamental resource would permeate the ship. Will it be enough? What if we get lost? What if we're becalmed and the voyage takes longer than expected? That constant, low-level worry, combined with the physical discomfort of thirst and the unappealing nature of the available drinks, is yet another layer of the harsh reality you face. A stark contrast to the effortless hydration you take for granted. So, you've received your ration of rock-hard fish and dense biscuit, maybe a lump of dried meat. Your throat is dry, and you've had your small measure of stale water or sour ale. Now, how do you actually consume this meal? Any comforting thoughts of gathering around a crackling fire for a hot, cooked dinner need to be extinguished immediately. Cooking, as you understand it, was an extreme rarity, a significant challenge, and potentially lethal luxury aboard a Viking longship at sea. The reasons are starkly practical. Firstly, fire is inherently dangerous on a vessel made entirely of wood, coated in flammable tar, with woolen sails and ropes ready to catch any stray spark. A fire getting out of control wouldn't just damage the ship, it would utterly destroy it, leaving you adrift in the cold ocean. Secondly, the ship is constantly moving. The deck pitches and rolls, making any open flame unstable and liable to scatter hot embers. Thirdly, fuel itself is scarce. Wood or charcoal takes up valuable space and weight, and finding dry fuel during a long sea voyage is difficult. Managing even a small fire requires constant attention, diverting manpower from other essential tasks like sailing or rowing. While sustained cooking was largely out of the question, there's evidence for the occasional use of a firebox for very limited heating, likely only attempted during periods of relative calm or when anchored in sheltered waters. Imagine a heavy, shallow box, perhaps made of soapstone slabs lashed together, or a sturdy wooden frame filled with sand or clay to create an insulated hearth. This would be positioned in the most stable part of the boat, maybe amidships, carefully monitored. The fire within would be small, fed with painstakingly gathered dry twigs, driftwood if near land, or possibly precious charcoal brought specifically for this purpose. Its primary function might be to simply heat water, perhaps to make soaking the hardtack more effective, or to create a warm, thin gruel from oats or barley, if such supplies were carried. Maybe, just maybe, small pieces of fish could be quickly warmed over the embers, or water heated for a medicinal brew. But this was likely an infrequent event, a welcome break from the norm, not a daily routine. The default, day in and day out, was cold food. So, prepare yourself for the reality of eating your rations as they come. Rations are distributed, perhaps by someone moving carefully along the boat, doling out portions from a sack or barrel. You find a place to brace yourself, maybe wedged on your sea chest, leaning back against the rough timber of the hull's side, or squatting on the deck planks, knees drawn up. You receive your share, perhaps onto a piece of cloth, or more likely into your personal wooden bowl, a simple, turned or carved vessel, smooth from use, that you carry tucked in your chest or belt. It smells faintly of all the previous meals it has held. Now, how to tackle the food itself? Forget a neat place setting. Your primary tool is your axe, the ubiquitous Viking single-edged knife, carried by nearly everyone. This isn't fine cutlery, it's a robust working tool, maybe 20 to 30 centimeters long overall, used for everything from cutting rope, mending leather, carving wood, potentially defending yourself, and, yes, eating. You hold the hardtack in one hand, perhaps dipping it into your bowl of water or ale held precariously between your knees. You use your knife to saw off a chunk of the tough, salty fish, or to spear a piece and bring it to your mouth. You use your hands extensively, tearing, holding, wiping grease or crumbs on your tunic. Look around you. Others are doing exactly the same, huddled in their own small spaces, focused intently on the task of consuming their meager portion. The sounds are not of polite conversation, but of effortful chewing on tough food, perhaps the clack of a knife against a wooden bowl, the occasional slurp of liquid. The smells are of the food itself, mingled with the close-packed human scents, salt, and tar. It's intensely communal, yet strangely isolating, each person locked in their own small battle to get the necessary fuel down. Hygiene during this process is rudimentary. Your hands are likely grimy from handling ropes, tar, or bilge water. Your knife, used for countless other tasks, is wiped clean perhaps, but not sterilized. Your bowl is likely just rinsed with seawater, if rinsed at all. Sharing this space, these utensils, means sharing germs readily. but concerns about microscopic contamination are centuries in the future. Here, the focus is entirely on the immediate need for sustenance. Eating is reduced to its most basic function, fueling the body to endure another few hours of cold, damp, labor, and boredom. It lacks ritual, comfort, pleasure, and the social graces you associate with meals. It's simply part of the relentless cycle of survival on the unforgiving sea. Enduring weeks of the same dry, salty rations wasn't just hard on the palate, it could also be nutritionally depleting. While preserved food kept starvation at bay, fresh protein and fats were always welcome, providing essential nutrients and a significant boost to morale. That's where fishing came in, not as a sport, not as a relaxing hobby, but as a crucial, opportunistic hunt for fresh sustenance directly from the sea that surrounded you. Imagine the scene. Perhaps during a period of calmer weather, or when the crew senses they are over a potentially productive fishing ground, the lines come out. These aren't lightweight monofilament lines on elegant rods. Think thick, sturdy cords, possibly twisted fibers of hemp, nettle, or linden bark, or perhaps strips of tough, oiled leather or walrus hide. They feel coarse and strong in your hands. The hooks attached are functional, sturdy things, maybe barbed pieces of iron forged by a blacksmith, or carefully shaped points carved from bone or antler, sharp enough to pierce a fish's jaw, strong enough to hold its weight. Bait is whatever can be spared or scavenged. Perhaps a small piece of the salted fish ration is sacrificed, its intense smell hopefully attracting something larger. Or maybe someone has hoarded some particularly smelly piece of dried meat, or even uses brightly colored cloth or carved wood as a lure. These lines are then dropped over the side, trailing in the ship's wake or lowered directly down if the vessel is moving slowly or anchored. Holding the line, you feel the slight tension from the weight, the drag of the current. Then begins the patient wait. You might stand or sit for hours, feeling the gentle pull and vibration of the line through your fingers, hypersensitive to any change, any sudden twitch or heavier drag that signals a potential bite. Others might employ a jigging technique, rhythmically raising and lowering the line to make the bait dance enticingly in the water below. If the longship carried a smaller boat, a fairing perhaps, it might be launched in sheltered waters to allow a couple of crew members to row away slightly and deploy nets, hoping to encircle a shoal of herring or mackerel, a potentially much larger but more effort-intensive haul. What are you hoping to catch? Depending on the waters, it could be the ubiquitous cod, a large, heavy fish providing substantial meat. Maybe pollock, haddock, or ling, all valuable whitefish. Closer to the surface, you might hook into a powerful mackerel, sleek and fast, or find a dense shoal of herring, smaller but numerous. Catching anything substantial feels like a victory against the monotony. Suddenly, you feel it, a sharp tug, then a heavy, struggling weight on the line. The call goes out. Fish on! And the quiet patience erupts into focused activity. You haul the line in, hand over hand, feeling the strain in your arms as the unseen creature fights against you in the depths. Water sprays as the line cuts through the waves. Then it breaks the surface. Perhaps a large, pale-bellied cod, eyes wide, mouth gaping, twisting and thrashing. With a final heave, it's pulled over the gunwale and lands with a wet thud on the deck planks, scales flashing, gills working desperately. There's no pause for admiration. The fish is dispatched quickly and efficiently. Someone grabs it firmly, minding the thrashing tail and sharp fins, and delivers a swift, hard blow to its head with a wooden club or the flat of an axe, silencing its struggles. Then, the processing begins immediately, right there on the deck. You might be tasked with this. Kneeling beside the catch, you take your sharp sea-axe knife. Feel the cool, incredibly slippery skin beneath your fingers, coated in a natural slime. You make a deft slice along the belly from vent to gills. The knife cuts easily through the skin and muscle. Reaching inside the body cavity, you grasp the internal organs, the stomach, intestines, liver, a slippery, surprisingly warm mass, and pull them out with a wet, tearing sound. They are unceremoniously tossed overboard, where eager seabirds might already be circling and crying out, anticipating their share. Next, perhaps, scaling. Using the back of your knife or a specialized scraping tool, you work against the grain of the scales, sending them flying in shimmering arcs, sticking to the wet deck, to your clothes, to your arms. Finally, the fish is likely rinsed with buckets of cold seawater, washing away the blood and remaining viscera, leaving the pale flesh ready. The smell of fresh fish, blood, and the sea itself momentarily overwhelms the background sense of tar and bilge. Seeing, smelling, feeling this direct transformation from living creature to food source is a powerful, grounding experience, utterly unlike picking up a sanitized fillet from a modern supermarket. For the Viking crew, it wasn't gruesome, it was essential. This fresh catch represents not just calories but flavor, variety, precious oils and nutrients, and a tangible reward from the sea they both battled and relied upon. It's a reminder that amidst the hardship and preserved rations, the ocean could also provide immediate, fresh bounty, if you had the skill, the patience, and the luck. Simply enduring the cramped conditions, the poor food, and the harsh elements wasn't enough to guarantee survival on a Viking longship. The vessel itself, your only refuge between the sea and the sky, demanded constant attention, constant labor. This wasn't a passive journey where you merely waited to arrive. It was an ongoing, collective effort to keep your world afloat and functioning. There were no specialized maintenance crews, no automated systems, just human muscle, vigilance, and a set of relentless essential chores that filled the hours between rowing, resting, and rationing. Let's return to the unavoidable task of bailing. Water always finds a way in. Even the best-built ship with tightly clenched planks isn't perfectly impervious forever. Small amounts seep through seams stressed by the waves. Spray washes over the gunnels in rough weather. Rain collects. This water gathers in the bilge, the lowest part of the hull, and it can't be ignored. Imagine being assigned this duty, perhaps working in pairs. You're crouched low in the belly of the boat, the air thick with the smell of damp wood, tar, and something else. The unique, unpleasant odor of the bilge water itself. It's likely murky, grayish-brown, smelling stagnant and sour, maybe with an oily sheen on top from spilled food or tar, perhaps containing bits of rotting debris. Using a large wooden scoop, carved for maximum capacity, or maybe a sewn leather bucket, you dip into this sloshing mess. Feel the cold seep through your clothes as you lean into it. Then the lift. It's surprisingly heavy. Scoop after scoop, you lift and dump the water over the side, hearing it splash into the sea. Your back begins to ache with the repetitive motion. Your arms burn. If the ship is taking on water quickly due to rough seas or leaky seams, the work feels frantic, almost futile, a constant battle against the encroaching ocean. It's wet, smelly, exhausting work, yet absolutely vital. Then there's the constant care required by the rigging and the sail, the engine that harnesses the wind. The ropes, oar sheets and stays, holding the mast and controlling the large square woolen sail, are under tremendous fluctuating forces. They were likely made of tarred hemp, feeling coarse, slightly sticky, and smelling strongly of tar or sometimes tough, oiled strips of walrus or seal hide. You, or someone more experienced, would constantly be checking them, running hands along their length, feeling for telltale signs of wear, sections flattened by friction where they pass through holes or around wood, individual strands starting to fray, areas weakened by saltwater saturation. A critical rope snapping in a strong gust could lead to the mast falling or the sail tearing uncontrollably. Immediate, life-threatening danger. Minor fraying might be temporarily reinforced with wrappings. More serious damage requires splicing, a complex skill involving carefully unlaying the strands of the rope, then weaving them back together or into another piece of rope to create a strong join, perhaps using a pointed tool called a fid, often made of wood or bone, to separate the strands. The sail itself, heavy woolen cloth often dyed or painted, also needed inspection. Tears from wind stress or chafing had to be patched. A difficult job involving pushing a large, possibly three-sided sailmaker's needle, threaded with coarse twine through the thick, often damp fabric. Using a leather palm worn over your hand to provide the necessary force. The wooden hull also needed periodic attention. While major repairs waited for land, minor issues had to be addressed at sea. Seams might loosen slightly, requiring fresh, hot tar to be forced into the gaps to maintain watertightness. Imagine the smell of bubbling tar heated carefully in that firebox, the sticky, messy application process. Maybe a rivet head pops off, needing to be replaced by hammering a new one hot, if the tools and spare rivets are aboard. Small sections of wood damaged by storms or wear might need smoothing or minor reinforcement. These tasks required basic woodworking skills and tools, and a steady hand on a moving platform. And weaving through all this physical labor was the unending duty of the watch. Standing watch was less about brute force and more about sustained vigilance, a different kind of endurance. Imagine taking your turn, perhaps for 2 or 3 miserable hours in the dead of night, or under the relentless glare of the midday sun. You stand near the bow, or perhaps the stern, eyes constantly scanning, ears straining. You're not just looking for obvious things like land or other ships. You're attuned to subtleties, feeling the shift in the wind on your face, noticing changes in the wave patterns that might indicate shallows or distant storms, listening to the cries of specific seabirds that signal proximity to land, sniffing the air. Sometimes you can smell land, the scent of earth or wood smoke, before you can see it. You watch the stars or the sun for navigation, gauge the ship's speed and direction. You look for hazards, floating logs, rocks near shore, and always you look for threats, the sail of another vessel, potentially hostile. All this while battling the elements, the cold, the wet, the heat, and the insidious creep of fatigue and boredom. Your mind has to remain alert, actively observing, interpreting, ready to raise the alarm. The safety of everyone relies on your tired eyes and unwavering attention. It's a heavy responsibility, performed in shifts around the clock, ensuring there was never a moment the ship was truly unwatched, untended. This constant cycle of demanding chores, layered on top of the basic struggle for comfort and sustenance, defined the rhythm of life and survival at sea. The iconic image of a longship often features its large, square sail billowing in the wind, driving it across the waves. and indeed the sail was its primary engine for long distances. But what happens when the wind dies completely, leaving the sea glassy and still? What about navigating tricky harbors, winding rivers, or needing precise slow movements for tactical reasons? In these frequent situations, the ship relied on its other power source, human muscle. Prepare yourself, because if the wind fails or control is needed, you will be expected to contribute to the grueling, back-breaking labor of rowing. Find your place on one of the hard wooden thwarts, those cross benches spanning the width of the boat. Perhaps you're even sitting directly on your sea chest, lashed securely. Before you is an oar. Don't picture a light, modern composite sculling oar. This is likely a long, heavy shaft of solid wood, perhaps pine or ash, possibly 5 or 6 meters long overall. The part you hold, the loom, is rough, unfinished wood, maybe worn slightly smoother by previous hands, but still coarse against your skin. The blade end, which bites into the water, is broad and flat to provide maximum purchase. Lifting it feels awkward, unbalanced. It has weight, substance. Now, the rhythm begins. Perhaps a designated leader, the coxswain, starts a chant, or simply calls out the timing. You watch the person in front of you, trying desperately to match their movements. The stroke starts with you leaning forward, arms extended, sliding slightly on the thwart if possible. Then, drop the oar blade into the water, the catch. Now the power phase begins, and it's a full-body effort, not just arms. You push hard with your legs against the floorboards, or a foot brace if one exists. Your core muscles clench tight to stabilize your torso. Your back muscles engage with tremendous force as you lean back, pulling the heavy oar through the resistant water. Your arms finish the stroke, pulling the loom towards your chest. Then, the recovery, feathering the blade slightly as you lift it, leaning forward again, ready for the next catch. Repeat, and repeat, and repeat. For someone like you, unaccustomed to this intense, specific physical labor, the effects are immediate and brutal. Within minutes, your muscles start to scream in protest. Not just your arms and shoulders, but the large muscles of your back, your legs straining with the push, your abdominal muscles aching from the constant stabilization. A burning sensation builds, lactic acid flooding your system. Your breath comes in ragged gasps, the salty air doing little to cool your laboring lungs. And your hands, oh, your hands. Accustomed to keyboards, steering wheels, perhaps some light gardening at most. The friction of the rough wooden loom against your soft skin is merciless. Hot spots form almost immediately. Within the first hour, these will likely blister, painful sacs of fluid forming under the skin. As you're forced to continue rowing, gripping that oar tightly, those blisters will inevitably tear open, leaving raw, weeping patches of skin exposed to the wood, the sweat, the grime. The pain becomes sharp, intense, making every single stroke an exercise in agony. Yet you cannot stop. The ship's progress, or its ability to hold position, depends on everyone pulling together. You look at the hands of the experienced crew, calloused, hardened leather, shaped by years of this toil. Yours feel pitifully inadequate. Listen to the sounds around you, the rhythmic groan and creak of the wooden oars pivoting in the oarlocks. Perhaps simple notches in the ship's rail, maybe lined with leather to reduce friction slightly, but still groaning under the strain. The collective splash and pull as dozens of blades enter and drive through the water in rough unison. The grunt and heavy breathing of the rowers beside you. The coxswain's voice, chanting or calling out encouragement or correction, trying to keep everyone synchronized. It's the sound of pure, relentless, human-powered propulsion. This isn't a quick burst of effort. Rowing could last for hours, especially if trying to make headway against a slight current or headwind, or simply needing to cover distance in a dead calm. Breaks might be brief, allowing just enough time to gulp some water, wipe sweat from your eyes, and feel the deep ache settle into your muscles before the rhythm starts again. Exhaustion becomes profound, a bone-deep weariness that makes even lifting the heavy oar feel like a monumental task. Your mind might drift into a numb haze, focusing only on the movement of the person in front, the rhythm, the pain. Think of the effortless power of modern engines, turning a key, pushing a lever, crossing vast distances with minimal physical input. Now contrast that with this scene. Dozens of human beings straining, sweating, bleeding, pushing their bodies to the absolute limit, just to move this wooden vessel through the water at perhaps a few knots. It's a visceral reminder of the immense physical cost of travel and survival in this era. A cost your body is now paying in full, after hours, perhaps days, of seeing nothing but the endless gray or blue expanse of the sea meeting the sky. A fundamental question likely forms in your mind, growing perhaps into a significant anxiety. How does anyone know where we are going? You look around the ship. There's no glowing GPS screen, no complex radar display, no precisely calibrated magnetic compass as you know it, although simple magnetic pointers might have been emerging. How, in this vast, featureless ocean, do they find their way? The answer lies in a remarkable, intricate reliance on the natural world, interpreted through deep experience and observation, skills that feel terrifyingly imprecise to your modern sensibilities. Your primary guides are the heavens. During the day, the sun is paramount. Experienced navigators would observe its arc across the sky with incredible accuracy. They'd note its position at dawn, its highest point at midday, which indicates south in the northern hemisphere, and its setting point. The length and direction of shadows cast by the mast or a specific marker on the deck could offer clues to time and direction. There might even be a simple sun compasses aboard. Perhaps a wooden disc with markings, used with a central pin whose shadow indicated direction relative to the sun's known path for that time of year and latitude, requiring significant skill to use accurately. At night, assuming the skies are clear, the stars take over. The most crucial is Polaris, the North Star. Its position remains relatively fixed in the northern sky, and its height above the horizon provides a remarkably good indication of your latitude, how far north or south you are. Experienced eyes would also recognize key constellations, noting their positions and how they appear to rotate around the North Star through the night, acting as a giant celestial clock and compass. Imagine lying on the deck, looking up at a sky ablaze with stars, far from modern light pollution, and realizing that this glittering map is your only reliable chart. But what happens when clouds roll in, obscuring the sun by day and the stars by night? This is where the true artistry and deep environmental knowledge of the Viking navigator becomes critical. They would read other, subtler signs. They watched the flight paths of birds. Certain seabirds, like gannets or shearwaters, range far out to sea but return to land to roost, so their consistent flight direction at dawn or dusk could indicate the bearing of unseen land. The type of bird also mattered. Some species stay closer to shore. They might even follow migrating whales, whose seasonal routes were often known and could lead it towards land masses or specific currents. The sea itself offered clues. Experienced sailors learned to distinguish between the chaotic waves generated by local winds and the deeper, more regular ocean swells, which often maintain a consistent direction over long distances, potentially indicating a general course. The color and clarity of the water could change too. Greener, murkier water, often signaling shallower depths or proximity to river outflows near land, compared to the deep blue of the open ocean. Floating debris, specific types of seaweed, branches, man-made refuse, could also hint at nearby shores or currents flowing from known locations. Closer to land, a sounding weight, a lead weight attached to a long line, often with tallow packed into a hollow at the bottom to pick up samples, would be dropped overboard to measure depth and determine the nature of the seabed, helping to identify familiar coastlines even in fog. There's also the intriguing, though still debated, possibility of the sunstone. Perhaps a piece of naturally polarizing crystal like calcite or cordierite. The theory is that by holding such a crystal up and rotating it, a skilled user could detect the direction of polarized sunlight, revealing the sun's position even through fairly thick cloud cover or fog. Imagine the skipper, squinting at the gray sky through such a stone, trying to find that elusive bearing, a desperate measure when all else failed. But beyond all these techniques, the most vital navigational tool was the skipper's own mind, their accumulated experience, their memory of previous voyages, their intimate knowledge of coastlines, currents, winds, and seasonal patterns. They built a mental map through years of travel. Yet, even with all this skill, navigation remained an uncertain art. Storms could blow ships wildly off course. Fog or persistent cloud cover could render most techniques useless. Getting lost was a very real and dangerous possibility. Now, place yourself back on that deck. You, accustomed to the pinpoint accuracy of GPS telling you your location within meters, your speed, your estimated time of arrival down to the minute. Here, you understand none of the subtle signs the navigator is reading. The sun is hidden, the stars are obscured, the waves look chaotic. You feel adrift, utterly dependent on the judgment and experience of one or two individuals interpreting clues that seem vague and unreliable. The feeling of vulnerability, of being truly lost at sea with only human skill standing between you and oblivion, would be profound. It's a deep, unsettling uncertainty that modern technology has almost entirely erased from our travel experience. Beyond the physical hardships, the cold, the wet, the bad food, the exhausting labor, there lies another significant challenge, one perhaps less obvious but deeply corrosive: the sheer, soul-crushing monotony of a long sea voyage. After the initial novelty or terror wears off, you settle into a routine dictated by watches, chores, and the rhythm of the sea itself. And, stretching before you, day after day, possibly for weeks on end, is an unchanging vista. The gray or blue expanse of water meeting the endless dome of the sky. Imagine waking, performing your duties, eating your meager ration, and then having hours ahead with little to do but exist within this confined, rolling world. The view rarely changes in the open ocean. The sea might be calmer or rougher, the sky clear or overcast, but the fundamental elements remain the same. The constant sounds, the creaking timbers, the wind, the waves, which might have seemed novel at first, fade into a monotonous background drone. Time itself seems to stretch and warp, the hours crawling by with agonizing slowness, each day blurring into the next, marked only by the changing watches or the distribution of food. How do you cope with this profound lack of external stimulation, this sensory near deprivation? You, accustomed to a world saturated with information, entertainment, and instant communication. Smartphones, streaming services, endless news feeds, constant social connection. Here, the diversions are few, simple and entirely self-generated or shared within the small community of the ship. Perhaps the most important pastime is storytelling. When work allows, maybe in the dim light of evening or during a long watch, someone with a knack for it might begin a tale. Imagine gathering close, huddled against the cold, listening intently as a practiced voice spins yarns of legendary heroes like Ragnar Lothbrok or Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, tales filled with battles, bravery, and treasure. Or perhaps they recount the complex, dramatic myths of the Norse gods, Odin's wisdom, Thor's strength, Loki's mischief. Maybe the stories are more personal, recounting the glories or disasters of previous voyages, sharing news and gossip from home ports, boasting of past exploits. A skilled storyteller could hold the crew captivated, transporting them, however briefly, away from the tedious reality of the ship, reminding them of their culture, their values, their goals. Listening becomes an active participation, a vital way to pass the time and reinforce social bonds. Music, too, might offer some solace. Someone might sing, perhaps work songs or shanties with a strong rhythm to accompany rowing or hauling ropes, the call and response structure involving the whole crew. Or maybe melancholic ballads about loss, love, or the dangers of the sea, sung in a low voice during a quiet night watch. While complex instruments were impractical, someone might possess a simple bone flute or a jaw harp, capable of producing plaintive melodies that hang briefly in the salt air before being carried away by the wind. These moments of music would be rare islands of beauty in a sea of hardship. Simple games could help while away the hours. You might see two crew members hunched over a Nefertafel board scratched into the lid of a sea chest, a strategic Viking board game akin to chess, involving a king trying to escape attackers. Dice games, perhaps played using carved bone dice, were likely popular, probably involving small wagers, a bit of silver, a favor owed, bragging rights. Knucklebones, a game of dexterity using sheep astragali, might also be played. Beyond these shared activities, individuals might occupy themselves with practical tasks, meticulously sharpening their personal knife or axe blade with a whetstone, mending tears in their woolen tunic or leather shoes with needle and thread, carving small objects from scraps of wood or bone found around the ship, or simply checking and rechecking their own meager gear stored in their sea chest. Keeping hands busy could help keep the mind from dwelling too much on the discomfort or the uncertainty. But even with these diversions, the underlying boredom, the feeling of being trapped in this small, wet, uncomfortable space could become oppressive. Restlessness might give way to a dull lethargy. Tempers could fray easily over minor annoyances. Homesickness might surface, a longing for family, land, solid ground. A low-level anxiety about the voyage. Are we lost? Are supplies running low? What dangers lie ahead? Could simmer constantly beneath the surface. Maintaining morale, both individually and collectively, required significant mental fortitude. Imagine yourself in this state. Your mind, used to flitting from one stimulus to the next, is forced into inactivity or focused on repetitive, unpleasant tasks. There are no screens to distract you, no quick calls to loved ones, no endless stream of new content. You are left with your own thoughts, the company of the same few dozen people, and the vast, indifferent ocean. The struggle to stay positive, to resist irritability, to simply endure the crushing weight of uneventful time, might be one of the most profound and unexpected challenges you face. Living jammed together in such close proximity, facing constant danger and hardship, requires more than just physical endurance. It demands a clear social structure and agreed-upon rules to maintain order and ensure the group can function effectively towards its common goal, whether that goal is trade, exploration, or raiding. Forget modern ideas of democratic consensus or detailed employee handbooks. The longship operated under a pragmatic, often harsh, system of hierarchy and understood obligations, a ship's law essential for survival. At the apex of this floating micro-society stands the skipper, the chieftain, or the leader of the expedition. Their authority might stem from various sources. Perhaps they own the ship or financed the voyage, providing the vessel and supplies. Perhaps they are a proven warrior of great renown, whose reputation for success and bravery attracts loyal followers. Maybe they belong to a powerful family or lineage that commands respect. Often, it would be a combination of these factors, bolstered by demonstrated skill in seamanship, navigation, and leadership, the ability to make tough decisions under pressure and inspire confidence in the crew. This leader holds ultimate authority during the voyage. Their word is, quite literally, law on the open sea. They decide the course, the rationing, the work assignments, the timing of attacks or landings. Below the skipper is likely a core group of experienced individuals. These might include seasoned warriors who form the leader's personal retinue or bodyguard, skilled navigators responsible for finding the way, the helmsman who steers the ship under the skipper's direction, perhaps a staller or marshal responsible for onboard discipline. These individuals command respect due to their skills and experience, likely receive a larger share of any spoils, and might have some influence on the skipper's decisions. They form the backbone of the ship's operational capability. Then comes the bulk of the crew, the free men, the warriors and sailors who have pledged themselves to the voyage. This is where you would find yourself. You are expected to row, bail, fight, stand watch, and obey orders without question. Your place in the informal hierarchy depends on your experience, strength, and reputation. As a newcomer, you are at the bottom, expected to take on the least desirable tasks, prove your worth, and learn the ropes, both literally and figuratively. Your share of any plunder or profit from the voyage would likely be smaller than that of the core veterans. In some cases, there might even be a lower tier. Thralls, which is to say slaves or servants, perhaps captured on previous voyages, performing the most menial tasks with no rights or share in the rewards. Their presence would further solidify the hierarchy above them. Governing the interactions and obligations within this structure is the concept of the ship's law, or the felag, the partnership or fellowship agreement entered into for the voyage. This wouldn't be a written document, but a set of deeply understood traditional rules and expectations. Key elements would likely include absolute obedience to the skipper while at sea, a predetermined system for dividing any plunder or profits, mutual defense, rules against fighting amongst the crew while on the voyage, and likely strict rules about handling rations and shared resources. Loyalty to the group, the felag, was paramount. Orders are given directly, often shouted to be heard over the wind and waves. There's no room for debate or discussion once a command is issued by the skipper or one of their trusted veterans. You are expected to react instantly. Hesitation or refusal could be seen not just as insubordination, but as endangering the entire crew. And the consequences for breaking these rules, for failing in your duties, or for challenging the hierarchy. They would likely be swift and severe, reflecting the high stakes involved. Minor infractions or laziness might result in sharp rebukes, extra duties, or ridicule. More serious offenses, like theft of rations, repeated disobedience, or cowardice in the face of danger, could lead to physical punishment. Perhaps flogging, being bound, or receiving a smaller share or no share at all of any profits. In extreme cases, such as mutiny, murder, or actions that gravely endanger the ship, the penalty could be death, perhaps being thrown overboard, or at best being marooned on some desolate coast. The need for discipline and cohesion in this dangerous environment meant that challenges to authority or breaches of the ship's law were dealt with harshly to deter others. Imagine navigating this rigid structure as an outsider like yourself. You feel the weight of expectation, the constant scrutiny, the need to obey instantly even when exhausted or afraid. You see the deference paid to the skipper and the veterans, the clear lines of command. It's a far cry from the more fluid, formalized, and legally protected social and work environments you know. Here, your survival and well-being depend entirely on fitting into this structure, understanding the unwritten rules, and earning your place through obedience, effort, and perhaps, eventually, proving your worth in hardship or battle. Living shoulder to shoulder for weeks on end, facing shared dangers and relying on each other for literal survival, naturally forged powerful bonds amongst the crew of a longship. Yet, paradoxically, these same conditions, the intense proximity, the constant stress, the harsh environment, the scarcity of resources, also created fertile ground for friction, resentment, and outright conflict. Navigating the complex interplay between camaraderie and conflict was yet another essential skill for staying alive and functional within this floating microcosm of society. Let's first consider the forces pulling the crew together. The very nature of the voyage created a powerful sense of shared purpose and mutual dependence. Every man's life depended on the skill and effort of the others. When rowing, the ship moved only through collective, synchronized effort. When sailing, managing the large sail and strong winds required coordinated action. In a storm, everyone worked together frantically to bail water and keep the vessel afloat. This shared struggle against the elements fostered a deep sense of interdependence. Added to this was the concept, deeply ingrained in Viking warrior culture, of loyalty to one's leader and one's immediate companions, the Shield Brothers. This was more than just friendship. It was a pledge of mutual defense, an understanding that you would protect your comrades back in battle, share resources, and avenge their death if necessary. This loyalty within the phalag, the ship's company or partnership, was a cornerstone of their social structure. You would see this camaraderie manifest in countless small ways. Experienced hands might quietly offer guidance to a struggling novice like yourself without mockery. Rations, though scarce, might be shared fairly according to the agreed system. During breaks, stories and jokes would be exchanged, easing the tension and reinforcing shared cultural touchstones. In moments of danger, you would witness instinctive teamwork, individuals wordlessly anticipating each other's actions to handle a sudden squall or prepare for a potential threat. If someone was injured, others would do their best to tend to their wounds, offering rough comfort and practical assistance within the limits of their knowledge and supplies. These bonds, forged in hardship, were essential for maintaining morale and operational effectiveness. However, it would be naive to imagine the longship as a harmonious band of brothers all the time. The very conditions that fostered closeness also bred conflict. Imagine the constant, unavoidable physical contact, being jostled awake, having someone's wet cloak drip on you, enduring unpleasant smells. Personal habits that might be mildly annoying ashore could become infuriating in such relentless proximity. Add the physical exhaustion, the gnawing hunger or thirst, the anxiety about the voyage, the cold, the damp. It's a perfect recipe for frayed nerves and short tempers. Specific sources of friction were numerous. Disputes could arise over the distribution of rations, especially if someone felt they received less than their fair share. Arguments might erupt over perceived laziness or incompetence in performing chores. Personal space, though virtually non-existent, could still be encroached upon in ways deemed disrespectful. Perhaps someone carelessly handling your meager possessions stored in your sea chest. Simple personality clashes, differences in status, or simmering resentments from past events ashore could easily boil over in this pressure cooker environment. A perceived slight, a boastful comment, a disagreement over strategy. Any could spark conflict. How were these inevitable tensions managed at sea? Open brawling or serious infighting on board would be incredibly dangerous, potentially damaging the ship or leading to fatal accidents. Therefore, strong mechanisms existed, both formal and informal, to suppress or resolve conflict before it escalated disastrously. Minor disputes or grumbling might be deliberately ignored or smoothed over by the individuals involved or by more senior crew members, recognizing the need to prioritize the voyage's success. The authority of the skipper was crucial here. They could intervene directly, investigate disputes, pass judgment, and enforce their decision, perhaps ordering apologies, imposing minor penalties, or simply telling the involved parties to put the issue aside until they reached land. The understood ship's law likely prohibited internal fighting during the voyage itself. Deep-seated feuds or matters of honor were often explicitly postponed, with the understanding they would be settled properly, perhaps through negotiation, compensation, or even formal duels, once back on solid ground. The immediate survival of the group took precedence over individual grievances while afloat. For you, as an outsider trying to integrate, this complex social dynamic would require constant vigilance. You'd need to learn quickly who held influence, who had a short temper, what topics were sensitive. You'd strive to avoid causing offense, pull your weight without complaint, and observe how disputes were handled. Building trust and demonstrating loyalty to the phalag would be paramount. Getting drawn into internal conflicts could be dangerous, potentially leaving you isolated or targeted. It's a delicate balancing act, forging necessary bonds while carefully navigating the undercurrents of tension and rivalry that inevitably flow beneath the surface of such an intense, confined community. As you endure the physical realities of the longship, the cold, the damp, the relentless motion, it's important to understand that for the Vikings navigating these waters, the sea was far more than just a physical environment. It was a realm imbued with personality, power, and ancient, often capricious entities. Their worldview, woven from myth, superstition, and hard-earned experience, added another profound layer of meaning, and sometimes dread, to every wave, every gust of wind, every creature encountered. For them, and therefore now for you, the ocean itself was alive and aware. Central to this understanding were figures like Aegir, often seen as the very personification of the ocean, a powerful Jotun, or giant sometimes depicted as an old man with a wild beard of seaweed. He commanded the waves, hosted grand, raucous feasts for the gods in his golden hall beneath the sea, but his temper was unpredictable. Sailors might feel they were traveling across his domain only by his sufferance. Even more directly feared, perhaps, was his wife, Ran. She possessed a great net, and it was believed that she used it to capture sailors who drowned, dragging them down to her cold, dark realm. The fear of ending up in Ron's net rather than reaching Valhalla or another afterlife was a chilling reality for those who made their living and often met their end upon the waves. Drowning wasn't just dying, it was potentially being claimed by a possessive sea goddess. Beyond these primary deities, the Viking imagination populated the ocean depths with other monstrous possibilities. Whispers and fragments in their lore speak of colossal creatures like the Kraken, a beast large enough to pull entire ships beneath the waves with its massive tentacles, or immense sea serpents, the Midgard serpent Jormungandr being the ultimate example, encircling the entire world, capable of crushing hulls with their coils. While you might dismiss these as fantasy, for the people on this ship, these creatures could feel like very real potential threats lurking in the unexplored abysses beneath the keel. Every large, unidentified shape glimpsed in the depths, every unusually large wave, could momentarily spark the fear of encountering such a legendary horror. This belief in an active, aware, and potentially dangerous supernatural world meant that natural phenomena were often interpreted through a lens of omens and portents. The behavior of birds took on special significance. Certain birds, like the small dark storm petrels flitting low over the waves, might be seen as harbingers of bad weather, perhaps even messengers from the gods of the underworld. Conversely, the sight of land-based birds far out at sea could bring hope, interpreted as a sign that land was nearer than expected. Cloud formations might be scrutinized for shapes resembling mythological figures or animals, their appearance potentially offering divine guidance or warning. Even the waves themselves might be read. An unusual pattern, a rogue wave appearing out of sequence, could be interpreted as a sign of Aegir's displeasure or Ran's attention. Strange lights, like the eerie glow of St. Elmo's fire sometimes seen dancing around the masthead during electrical storms, wouldn't be understood as static discharge, but as a supernatural manifestation, its meaning debated. Perhaps a sign of protection, perhaps an ill omen. Faced with such powerful, unpredictable forces, both natural and perceived supernatural, it was only natural for the crew to engage in small rituals aimed at ensuring safety and seeking favor. You might notice individuals quietly carving runes onto their sea chests, oars, or personal amulets. Perhaps the algae's rune for protection, shaped like an upright elk's horns or a sheltering tree, or raido, representing travel and rhythm, hoping to ensure a smooth journey. Before entering a particularly dangerous stretch of water, or when a storm threatened, the skipper or a crew member might make a small offering to the sea, perhaps pouring a splash of precious ale or mead over the side, or tossing in a small piece of silver or a carved token, a gesture intended to placate Aegir or Ran, a small bribe for safe passage. Quiet prayers or chants might be muttered, invoking the protection of favored gods like Thor, the storm battler, or perhaps Njordr, the god associated with seamanship and prosperity. Imagine experiencing the voyage through this lens. A sudden squall isn't just a meteorological event, it's the anger of Aegir. A near miss with a submerged rock isn't just luck, it's a sign you've been protected, or perhaps warned. The constant creaking of the ship isn't just timber stress, it might feel like the vessel itself is communicating its endurance or suffering. This worldview doesn't necessarily lessen the physical hardship, but it adds a profound psychological dimension. It fosters a deep respect, even fear, for the natural world, seeing it not as inert matter to be conquered, but as a powerful, sentient entity whose favor must be courted, whose anger must be avoided. It's a stark contrast to your modern, largely disenchanted view of the ocean as a physical system governed by predictable laws. Here, mystery, power, and personality infuse every wave and gust of wind. Life on the longship involves constant vigilance against the sea's moods, but sometimes vigilance isn't enough. Sometimes the ocean decides to unleash its full fury. And being caught in a major storm, far from land, in an open vessel like this, it's an experience that transcends mere discomfort and enters the realm of primal terror. Imagine the signs beginning subtly at first, signs that the experienced crew members around you notice long before you do. The sky takes on a strange, bruised color. The wind shifts direction and begins to pick up, developing a low, ominous moan through the rigging. The wave patterns change, becoming steeper, closer together, more chaotic. There's a hurried intensity to the crew's movements now. Gear is checked and secured with extra lashings. Ropes are tested. Orders are given more sharply. Then it hits. The wind escalates from a moan to a piercing shriek, then a deafening, continuous howl that seems to tear at the air itself. Rain begins, first as stinging drops, then as blinding sheets, perhaps mixed with hail that hammers down on the deck and anyone exposed. The sea, moments ago merely choppy, transforms into a terrifying landscape of liquid mountains. Huge, gray-black waves, far taller than the ship's masthead, rise up like moving cliffs, their crests blown into white spray by the ferocious wind. The ship, which felt relatively stable before, is now thrown about like a child's toy. It climbs agonizingly up the face of a colossal wave, hangs precariously at the summit with water streaming off its sides, then plunges sickeningly down into the trough, a deep valley between waves, only for the next mountain to loom up ahead. The motion is violent, unpredictable, jarring impacts that shake the entire vessel, sickening drops that leave your stomach behind, vicious rolls that threaten to capsize you entirely. Visibility drops to almost nothing. Between the driving rain and the thick spray torn from the wave tops, you can barely see the person next to you, let alone the bow or stern of the ship. The world becomes a roaring chaos of gray water and howling wind. Lightning might split the sky, momentarily illuminating a scene of pure pandemonium. Faces grim and set, water churning everywhere, the mast whipping back and forth like a reed. Thunder follows, a deep, gut-shaking concussion that vibrates through the wooden planks beneath you. The noise is overwhelming. The relentless howl of the wind, the explosive crash of waves breaking over the ship, the drumming of rain and hail, the tortured groaning of the ship's timbers under stresses they were barely designed to withstand. The frantic shouts of the crew trying to communicate over the din. You feel incredibly small, incredibly fragile, utterly powerless against the raw, untamed energy of nature unleashed. The crew works with a desperate, focused intensity. The heavy woolen sail, long since lowered and tightly furled against the mast, is checked constantly to ensure its lashings hold. A loose sail catching this wind would rip itself to shreds or capsize the ship instantly. Bailing becomes a frantic, non-stop effort. Multiple people working furiously just to try and keep ahead of the water pouring over the sides and seeping through stressed seams. You might find yourself clinging desperately to a lifeline, a rope strung along the deck, or bracing yourself against a thwart, every muscle clenched just to avoid being washed overboard by the torrents of icy water that surge across the deck with every wave. The cold is intense, penetrating through your soaked clothing, chilling you to the core despite the adrenaline coursing through your veins. Your hands are numb. Your body aches from the constant tension and impacts. Fear is a cold knot in your stomach, a primal terror that grips you as you watch waves tower over you, convinced each one will be the one that swamps the vessel entirely. You see the strain on the faces of the veterans, their usual confidence replaced by grim determination. You hear the skipper shouting orders, trying to keep the ship's bow pointed into the oncoming waves, the most dangerous position being caught broadside. Every creak and groan from the ship's structure sounds like it might be the vessel's last protest before breaking apart. And sometimes, despite all the skill and effort, the sea wins. Perhaps a wave larger than the rest crashes down, overwhelming the ship, filling it instantly, or the relentless pounding finds a weakness. A plank splinters, a seam bursts, and the icy water floods in too quickly for bailing to cope. Maybe the ship is thrown onto its side by a vicious roll and cannot recover, capsizing in moments. The sound of splintering wood, the roar of incoming water, the sudden, shocking cold as you are plunged into the churning sea. Disorientation, chaos, perhaps grabbing onto a piece of wreckage or an oar. But survival chances in such cold water, far from land amidst the ongoing storm, are terrifyingly slim. Hypothermia sets in quickly. Exhaustion overcomes even the strongest swimmer. Being shipwrecked isn't just an accident. It's likely a death sentence delivered by the cold, indifferent fury of the storm-tossed ocean. Perhaps even more terrifying than the sudden violence of a storm is the slow, creeping dread that accompanies the realization that you are truly, utterly lost. In the modern world, getting genuinely lost for an extended period, especially with modern communication and navigation technology, is relatively difficult. But here, on the vast, unmarked ocean, with navigation dependent on intermittent celestial cues and subtle environmental signs, being lost wasn't just a possibility, it was a constant, lurking danger, capable of turning a planned voyage into a desperate struggle for survival. Imagine days passing under a sky perpetually shrouded in thick, gray cloud. The sun, your primary daytime guide, is completely invisible, its position impossible to determine. Night brings no relief, as the stars and constellations remain hidden behind the impenetrable overcast. Or perhaps a dense, chilling fog descends, reducing visibility to just a few boat lengths, muffling sounds and clinging to everything with a disorienting dampness. The world shrinks to just this small wooden vessel adrift in an endless, featureless gray void. You sail on, perhaps maintaining a course based on the last known wind direction or swell pattern, but without confirmation from the sun or stars, doubt begins to creep in. Are we still going the right way? Has the wind shifted subtly? Has a current dragged us off course? The subtle environmental cues that the navigator relies on might also fail. In the deep ocean, far from land, there are no birds to observe. The wave patterns might become confused, driven by shifting winds associated with the persistent bad weather. The watercolor remains a uniform deep blue or gray. There is simply nothing. No external reference point. Just the ship, the crew, and the overwhelming indifferent emptiness surrounding you. The feeling of drifting aimlessly, of being untethered from any known position, becomes palpable. The sounds of the ship, the creaking wood, the flapping sail if the wind allows, seem to echo in the emptiness, lacking direction or purpose. The practical consequences quickly become critical. Food and, more importantly, fresh water are finite resources. Every day spent lost is another day consuming those precious supplies without getting any closer to your destination or a known source of replenishment. You start to notice the rationing becoming stricter. The daily water allowance, already meager, might be reduced further. Conversations among the crew become quieter, more subdued. You see worried glances exchanged, hushed discussions abruptly ceasing when you approach. The experienced sailors might spend hours just staring out into the gray void, searching desperately for any sign, any change. The skipper, usually a figure of confidence, might appear more strained, perhaps spending more time consulting with the navigator, scrutinizing the waves, sniffing the wind, their face etched with the heavy burden of responsibility. Now, consider your own state of mind. You, who likely carry a device in your pocket capable of pinpointing your location anywhere on the planet within seconds. You, who can access detailed maps showing every coastline, every island. You, who take for granted the ability to know exactly where you are and how to get where you want to go. This complete lack of certainty, this absolute dependence on the fallible human interpretation of ambiguous natural signs, feels utterly terrifying. It's a primal fear, the fear of the unknown, of being swallowed by infinity. Every creak of the ship, every shift in the wind, feeds your anxiety. Is that a good sign or a bad one? You have no way of knowing. You watch the skipper, trying to read their expression, searching for reassurance that isn't there. Your fate rests entirely in their hands, on their experience, on their intuition, on their luck. What are the possible outcomes of being truly lost at sea in this era? Perhaps, through sheer luck, or a break in the weather revealing the sun or stars again, the navigator reestablishes a bearing and finds the way. Or maybe you stumble upon land, but is it the land you sought? Or is it an unknown shore, potentially inhabited by hostile people? The prospect of landing, weakened, low on supplies, in unfamiliar territory is fraught with danger. The grimmest possibilities are stark. You could simply drift until the food and water run out completely, leading to slow starvation and dehydration, a desperate end far from home. Or the ship, weakened by the extended voyage or caught by an unexpected storm in its lost state, could founder, leaving no trace. Ships vanished without explanation all the time. Becoming lost didn't just mean being delayed, it meant facing the very real possibility of ceasing to exist, swallowed by the vast, uncaring ocean. Your fate unknown to anyone back home. Beyond the dramatic threats of storms and becoming lost, the daily grind of life aboard the longship carried its own constant, insidious dangers. The high risk of illness and injury, coupled with an almost complete lack of effective medical care. In your modern world, you likely take for granted access to antiseptics, antibiotics, pain relief, sterile dressings, trained doctors, and emergency services. Here, a minor accident or a simple infection that you wouldn't think twice about today could easily become a life-threatening ordeal. Your body, constantly stressed by cold, damp, poor nutrition, and exhaustion, would be more vulnerable than usual, and the environment itself was a breeding ground for trouble. Injuries were commonplace. Working with sharp tools like axes and knives in cramped, unstable conditions often led to cuts and gashes. Handling rough timber and coarse ropes inevitably resulted in splinters and deep rope burns. A moment's inattention while fishing could embed a barbed hook deep in your hand. These minor wounds, however, occurred in an environment teeming with bacteria. The grime on the deck, the unwashed hands, the contaminated bilge water. Without antiseptics to clean the wound properly, infection was not just a risk, it was highly probable. You might see a small cut, initially ignored, become red, swollen, hot to the touch, and start oozing thick, yellowish pus within a day or two. A foul smell might develop. This localized infection could easily spread through the bloodstream, leading to fever, chills, and potentially fatal sepsis. More serious injuries were also a constant hazard. The deck was often wet and slippery from spray or rain, and the ship's unpredictable motion made falls common. A bad fall could result in painful sprains or even broken bones. Imagine the agony of a fractured leg or arm aboard this constantly moving vessel. Setting the bone would be rudimentary at best, perhaps pulling it roughly into alignment and binding it tightly with wooden splints and cloth strips, with no anesthesia beyond maybe a swig of ale or simply gritting your teeth. Proper healing would be unlikely, potentially resulting in permanent disability or deformity. Heavy sea chests or other gear could shift suddenly in rough seas, causing crushing injuries to feet or hands. Working near the mast and rigging carried the risk of being struck by falling spars or heavy blocks. If a firebox was in use, severe burns were possible. Handling hot tar for repairs also presented dangers. And what passed for medical treatment? It was rudimentary in the extreme, based more on tradition and hope than on scientific understanding. Wounds might be washed, perhaps with seawater, or sometimes even urine. Bleeding might be staunched by direct pressure, or, in desperate cases, by cauterization, searing the wound shut with a piece of red-hot iron, or the flat of a heated knife blade. Imagine the searing pain, the smell of burning flesh, a brutal, last-resort measure to stop life-threatening blood loss, but one carrying immense risk of deeper tissue damage and infection. Herbal remedies might be applied. Poultices made from certain leaves or mosses known for their supposed healing properties. But their effectiveness was highly variable and often negligible against serious infection. There were no antibiotics to fight bacterial growth, no sterile dressings to protect wounds, no understanding of germ theory. Illness, too, could sweep through the crowded ship with devastating speed. Coughs and respiratory infections, exacerbated by the cold, damp conditions and close proximity, could easily turn into pneumonia. Contaminated food or water could lead to outbreaks of dysentery or other gastrointestinal illnesses, causing severe diarrhea, dehydration, and weakness, potentially fatal given the limited water supply. Skin infections, boils, and abscesses would be common due to poor hygiene and constant irritation from wet, rough clothing. On extremely long voyages, although perhaps less common for typical Viking routes compared to later transoceanic travel, the risk of scurvy caused by vitamin C deficiency from the lack of fresh fruit and vegetables could emerge, leading to bleeding gums, lethargy, and eventually death. Imagine yourself in this environment, acutely aware of your own physical vulnerability. Every small cut, every cough, every stumble carries a weight of potential danger, far exceeding what you're used to. You watch nervously if a shipmate falls ill, knowing it could easily spread to you. You guard your own health with a new diligence, keenly aware that there is no hospital, no doctor, no pharmacy waiting to help if things go wrong. There is only the basic knowledge of your shipmates, the resilience of your own body, and a significant measure of luck. This constant awareness of fragility, the absence of the medical safety net you implicitly rely upon today, adds another profound layer of stress and hardship to the already challenging voyage. After enduring the hardships, dangers, and monotony of the open sea for perhaps weeks, a change begins to ripple through the ship. It might start subtly. The navigator points, speaks quietly to the skipper. experienced eyes scan the horizon with renewed intensity. Perhaps you notice a change in the bird life. More numerous, different species. Maybe you catch a faint, almost imperceptible scent on the wind. The smell of damp earth, vegetation, or wood smoke, cutting through the constant salt tang. Or perhaps it's a change in the color of the water, or the appearance of specific cloud formations known to gather over land. Landfall is near. The atmosphere aboard transforms. Some of the weary tension of the voyage might ease, replaced by a palpable sense of anticipation, but it's often mixed with a new kind of focused energy, a grim sort of readiness. Because for many Viking voyages, reaching land wasn't just about finding refuge or trade, it was about fulfilling the primary purpose of the expedition, raiding. This was, for many, their work. A seasonal, high-risk, potentially high-reward activity integral to their economy and social structure. A way to acquire portable wealth like silver, jewelry, fine cloth, weapons, and, tragically, slaves. Now, you witness preparations that speak volumes about the intent. Sea chests are opened, but not just for spare clothes. Out come the tools of a different trade. You hear the scrape of whetstones on steel as warriors meticulously sharpen the edges of their axes and the points of their spears. Sunlight glints off blades being polished and inspected for any nicks or weaknesses. You see men checking the sturdy wooden shafts of their axes and spears, ensuring they are sound and secure. Heavy, round wooden shields, perhaps painted with personal emblems or stark colors, are brought out, their leather straps tested. The most chilling sound, perhaps, is the metallic clinking and rustling as mail shirts, burnies, are donned. Imagine tunics made of thousands of interlinked iron rings, heavy and flexible, offering vital protection against cuts and slashes. You see men helping each other lift the considerable weight of the mail over their heads, settling it onto their shoulders. Conical iron helmets, perhaps with a simple nose guard, are placed on heads, the leather linings adjusted for fit. The transformation is striking, the weary sailors becoming armed and armored figures, their faces hardening, their movements becoming more deliberate, more economical. Meanwhile, the skipper might be in quiet, intense conversation with the Corps veterans, perhaps pointing towards the approaching coastline, discussing landing spots, potential resistance, tactics. Roles might be assigned. Who forms the first wave ashore? Who guards the ship? Who handles specific tasks? There's likely an air of controlled tension, professional focus mixed with the underlying adrenaline of approaching danger. And where are you in all this? Likely feeling a potent cocktail of emotions entirely alien to your normal life. Relief at reaching land, yes, but overshadowed by a rising tide of fear and profound uncertainty. You watch these preparations with wide eyes, the reality of the voyage's purpose hitting home. You might be handed a simple weapon, perhaps a spear, or told to stay with the ship, or assigned a menial task like carrying gear. You feel the pressure to conform, to not show your fear, surrounded by these hardened individuals seemingly embracing the prospect of imminent violence. Your heart pounds in your chest. Your mouth feels dry for reasons other than thirst. What is expected of you? Will you survive what's coming? The disconnect between their focused readiness and your internal terror is vast. It's crucial to understand their perspective, however alien it feels to you. This wasn't necessarily about random savagery, though it could certainly be brutal. It was often a calculated economic and social activity within their cultural context. Wealth acquired through raiding brought status and influence back home. enabled leaders to reward followers, funded further expeditions. It was a dangerous business, certainly, but one with potential rewards deemed worth the immense risks, and the risks were indeed immense for them. They were often landing in unfamiliar territory, potentially facing organized, well-armed defenders. They could be outnumbered. Their approach might be detected, losing the element of surprise. The raid could fail, forcing a hasty, dangerous retreat back to the ships under attack. Warriors could be wounded or killed, diminishing the crew's strength for the journey home or future endeavors. The tension you feel now, observing these final preparations as the coastline grows clearer, sharper, is mirrored in the focused readiness of the crew. They are preparing to gamble their lives once again, this time not just against the sea, but against other humans, in pursuit of the wealth and renown that define success in their world. The outcome for everyone on board is profoundly uncertain. The ship grates against the shingle of the beach, a harsh, jarring sound after weeks of hearing only water and wind. Or perhaps it noses silently up a muddy riverbank under cover of dawn mist. The order is given, sharp and low. Men sling their round shields onto their backs or grip them firmly, heft their axes or spears, and leap over the side into the shallows. You follow, the shock of the cold water hitting your legs jolting you into the harsh reality of the moment. Feet find purchase on slippery stones or sinking mud. There's urgent, splashing movement as the war party forms up quickly on the shore, water dripping from woolen cloaks and leggings. The air smells different here. Damp earth, decaying leaves, maybe the scent of unfamiliar vegetation, perhaps the distant smell of wood smoke indicating settlement. There's an intense, focused silence among the crew now, broken only by the skipper's low commands, the clink of a weapon inadvertently hitting another, the harsh cries of local birds disturbed by your sudden arrival. You move inland, perhaps following a path, perhaps pushing through coastal brush, your heart pounding against your ribs. Every shadow seems menacing, every distant sound, a dog barking, a voice calling out, sends a jolt of adrenaline through you. The experienced warriors move with a practiced alertness, eyes constantly scanning, weapons held ready. You try to imitate them, feeling clumsy, exposed, terrifyingly out of place. Then it happens. Maybe a scout sent ahead returns hastily, whispering urgent news. Or perhaps a watcher hidden on a hill spots your approach. Suddenly, the quiet is shattered. A horn blows, a deep, resonant sound designed to carry. Church bells might begin to ring frantically, not the slow toll for prayer, but a rapid, urgent alarm. Shouts erupt from ahead, calls to arms, warnings. The element of surprise, so crucial for a successful raid, is lost. What you see next is not terrified villagers scattering, but the grim sight of organized, determined resistance. Perhaps local farmers and villagers, armed with sturdy spears, axes, even pitchforks and clubs, emerge from behind cottages or a hastily erected barricade, their faces set with the determination to defend their homes. Or worse, maybe this area is prepared, perhaps even expecting trouble, and you see the disciplined ranks of local militia or even professional soldiers, armed with swords, spears, and shields similar to your own. Maybe archers or crossbowmen, taking aim from protected positions. The planned charge, if one was intended, falters. There's a moment of chaotic hesitation. Orders are shouted, trying to form a shield wall perhaps, but arrows begin to hiss through the air, thudding into shields, glancing off helmets, finding gaps in armor, or striking unprotected limbs. You hear sharp cries of pain from your own side. Defenders with spears might charge forward, meeting the Viking approach with a bristling hedge of sharp points. The air fills with the sounds of battle, the clash of steel on steel or wood, the grunts of exertion, the shouts of commanders, the terrifying sounds of men wounded and afraid. All from the perspective of your attacking group now finding itself on the defensive or meeting unexpected parity. This isn't going according to plan. The resistance is too strong. The potential loss is too high for the expected gain. You see the skipper, perhaps after a brief, brutal assessment of the situation, make the hard decision. The order is given, sharp and urgent. Back to the ship. But retreating under fire is often more dangerous than attacking. Disciplined defenders press their advantage, harassing the withdrawing Vikings. Arrows continue to fly. There might be flanking attacks. You see some of your shipmates struggling, perhaps wounded, being helped or carried by their comrades who try to maintain a fighting withdrawal, turning to face the enemy, shields raised, then moving back again. The retreat is not a panicked rout, ideally, but a controlled, dangerous maneuver. The priority shifts instantly from plunder to survival, just getting everyone back to the safety of the longship. You, perhaps tasked with staying near the landing site or caught up in the confusing withdrawal, feel an overwhelming urge to simply run, your breath catching in your throat, stumbling over uneven ground, glancing back fearfully. The sounds of pursuit, the cries of your own wounded companions, the frustration and anger radiating from the warriors who failed to achieve their objective. It's a terrifying, chaotic scramble back towards the water's edge. A stark lesson in the deadly risks inherent in the raider's life. You scramble back aboard the longship, heart still pounding, perhaps soaked from the retreat through water or slick with nervous sweat. The relative safety of the vessel feels immense, but any relief is immediately tempered by the grim reality unfolding on deck. The raid failed, or perhaps succeeded only at a heavy cost. Now comes the aftermath, the tending of the wounded, a stark and sobering counterpoint to the adrenaline-fueled preparations you witnessed earlier. Men are helped or lifted back over the gunwale, their faces pale and etched with pain, their movements stiff or stumbling. Some lean heavily on comrades, others might need to be carried carefully onto the deck planks. The sounds now are not the clash of steel, but low groans of pain, sharp intakes of breath as wounds are jostled, perhaps muttered curses directed at the enemy, the gods, or fate itself. The air quickly becomes thick with the metallic, coppery smell of fresh blood, mingling unpleasantly with the familiar sense of tar, salt, and damp wool. Makeshift bandages, strips torn from tunics or cloaks, are already stained dark red. Patches of blood begin to pool slightly on the deck where the most seriously injured are laid down. Space is cleared amidst the usual clutter of chests and gear. The wounded are made as comfortable as possible, perhaps propped up against a chest or laid on spare furs. Then the treatment begins, performed not by trained medics, but by fellow warriors relying on rough experience and grim necessity. You watch, perhaps tasked with fetching water or holding someone steady, witnessing procedures that seem brutal yet are all that is available. Arrow wounds are particularly problematic. If an arrow shaft has broken off, leaving the barbed head embedded deep in muscle or limb, extracting it is agonizing and dangerous. Someone might probe the wound gently with fingers, or perhaps a knife point, trying to locate the arrowhead. If found, the options are grim. Either attempt to carefully cut it out, risking further damage and bleeding, or perhaps push it all the way through if it's near the surface on the other side. Both excruciatingly painful procedures performed without anesthetic. Deep cuts from swords or axes are flushed perhaps with hoarded fresh water, or more likely cold seawater, or even ale under the belief its alcohol might cleanse. Loose fragments of cloth or dirt are wiped away. Large, gaping wounds might be crudely stitched together using a needle, possibly made of bone or bronze, threaded with tough sinew pulled from animal tendons, each stitch drawing a pained gasp from the injured man. Bleeding might be controlled with direct pressure from pads of cloth, or, if severe arterial bleeding occurs, perhaps that terrifying last resort. Cauterization with a heated knife blade pressed against the severed vessel, sealing it shut with searing heat and the smell of burnt flesh. Broken bones sustained during the fighting or retreat are examined, perhaps pulled roughly back into alignment by strong hands, then immobilized as best as possible with wooden splints padded with cloth and bound tightly. Throughout this process, the atmosphere on the ship is heavy, subdued. The usual banter and storytelling are absent. Men work with quiet efficiency, their faces grim. There's a shared understanding of the fragility of life, the thin line between returning victorious and returning wounded, or not returning at all. Anger and frustration over the failed raid might simmer beneath the surface, but the immediate focus is on caring for their injured comrades. Perhaps the skipper moves among the wounded, offering a quiet word, assessing the damage not just in human terms, but in terms of the crew's diminished fighting strength for the journey home or future encounters. For you, witnessing this raw aftermath is profoundly shocking. The abstract idea of combat becomes terrifyingly real in the sight of these injuries, the sounds of pain, the smell of blood. You see the direct consequences of the violence you were so close to moments before. These aren't invincible heroes from sagas. They are flesh and blood, vulnerable, suffering. You might feel a mixture of horror, pity, and perhaps a chilling relief that it wasn't you lying there bleeding on the deck. It's a brutal lesson in the true cost of the Viking way of life, the inherent dangers of their chosen profession. And the danger isn't over once the initial wounds are bound. In the coming days, the real battle often began, the fight against infection. You watch the wounded anxiously. Does the skin around the injury become increasingly red, swollen, hot to the touch? Does the pain worsen instead of easing? Does a foul-smelling pus begin to discharge? Does the injured man develop a raging fever, shivering uncontrollably despite being covered in furs? These are the dreaded signs that infection has taken hold, and without antibiotics, the body's chances of fighting it off were often slim. A seemingly moderate wound could lead to a slow, agonizing decline ending in death days or weeks later, far out at sea, or perhaps back home if they even make it that far. An injured limb that develops gangrene might have to be amputated in a desperate, often fatal attempt to save the man's life. Seeing this unfold underscores the constant precariousness of their existence, where survival depended not just on bravery in battle, but on the whims of microscopic organisms in a world that had no defense against them. Imagine the voyage finally over, the perils of the sea and the risks of raiding behind you, at least for now. The longship navigates familiar waters, perhaps weaving through the protective skerries guarding a fjord, or sailing up a wide river mouth. You see familiar landmarks, a distinctively shaped hill, a sacred grove of trees, perhaps the rune-carved standing stone marking a boundary. The smell of the land intensifies. Rich earth, pine forests, damp moss, and overlaying it all, the unmistakable, comforting aroma of wood smoke from countless hearths. The sounds change too. The cries of seabirds mingle with the bleating of sheep, the lowing of cattle, the barking of dogs, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. You have arrived back at a Viking settlement, back home. But step ashore, leave the familiar deck of the longship, and enter this world. What does home look like in this age? Forget neat rows of houses with individual gardens. You're more likely to see scattered farmsteads, perhaps clustered loosely into a small village. The dominant structure is the longhouse, the iconic dwelling of the era. From the outside, it might seem almost part of the landscape. Long, low buildings, perhaps with walls made of sturdy timber planks, or sometimes wattle and daub, or even thick turf cut from the surrounding land, providing excellent insulation. The roofs are often covered in overlapping layers of birch bark topped with insulating turf, sometimes sprouting grass and wildflowers in the summer, looking like green-backed sleeping beasts. Simple fences made of wood or stone might enclose yards where livestock, hardy sheep, goats, perhaps some cattle or pigs, are kept. Small fields, cleared laboriously from the surrounding forest or moorland, show signs of cultivation, maybe oats, barley, or rye growing in season. Now, step inside the longhouse itself, perhaps pushing aside a heavy wooden door or a thick hide curtain. Your eyes take a moment to adjust from the daylight to the dim interior. The immediate impression is one of spaciousness, yet also profound smokiness and shadow. Light filters in dimly from smoke holes in the roof high above, and perhaps from low openings under the eaves, but there are no large windows. The air is thick with wood smoke, hanging in layers near the high-pitched roof, making your eyes water slightly and catching in the back of your throat. It's the pervasive perfume of indoor life here. Running down the center of the long earthen floor is the heart of the home, the long hearth, a rectangular pit perhaps lined with stones where a fire crackles and glows, providing light, warmth, and the means for cooking. This fire is rarely allowed to die out completely. Along the length of the house, on either side of the central aisle containing the hearth, are raised platforms, typically made of packed earth or wood. These serve multiple purposes: benches for sitting and working during the day, and sleeping areas at night, likely covered with furs, straw-filled mattresses, or woven textiles for some measure of comfort. The walls might be bare timber or turf, or perhaps hung with simple woven tapestries depicting scenes from myth or history, adding a touch of color and insulation. Shields and weapons might hang on pegs, ready for use. Tools related to farming or crafts, looms for weaving, woodworking tools, fishing nets needing repair, might occupy corners or lean against the walls. Listen to the sounds inside. The constant crackle and pop of the central fire. The murmur of voices, perhaps echoing slightly in the large, open space. The sounds of domestic activity. Maybe the rhythmic clack of a weaving loom. The scraping of a tool on wood. The bubbling of a pot over the fire. From outside, or perhaps from a section of the longhouse partitioned off as a byre, come the sounds of domestic animals. Bleating, lowing, clucking. It's a living soundscape, very different from the sea's relentless noise. Feel the environment. Near the central fire, there's a welcome warmth radiating outwards, a stark contrast to the chilling damp of the longship. But move towards the walls or ends of the longhouse, and the air remains cool, the earthen floor potentially damp underfoot. The textures are rough, unplaned wood, coarse woolen textiles, animal hides, packed earth. Life here is intensely communal. A single longhouse might shelter an entire extended family, along with farmhands, servants, or thralls. Privacy, as you understand it, is minimal. People work, eat, socialize, and sleep in this shared space, their lives interwoven. While this offers community and security, it lacks the personal space and quiet solitude you likely value. Compared to the constant peril and exposure of the sea voyage, the homestead offers a measure of stability and relative safety. But make no mistake, this is still a life lived close to the elements, demanding constant hard work for survival. Farming the often marginal land, tending livestock through harsh winters, preserving food, crafting tools and clothing. It's a rugged, basic existence. The comforts are few, the luxuries rare. It's a different kind of hardship from the ship, perhaps, but hardship nonetheless, viewed through the lens of your modern expectations. It underscores the incredible resilience and toughness required to simply live, let alone thrive in this world. Just as the physical environment of the homestead differs dramatically from the longship, so too does the food available on land offer a welcome, if still limited, contrast to the relentless monotony of sea rations. While life ashore still demands constant effort to secure enough sustenance, the possibilities for variety and freshness, governed heavily by the seasons and preservation techniques, are significantly greater than the stark menu of salted fish and hardtack endured during long voyages. Imagine waking not to the smell of salt and bilge, but to the aroma of wood smoke, mingled perhaps with the comforting scent of porridge bubbling slowly over the central hearth. Made from oats or barley grown in the nearby fields, cooked with water or perhaps milk. This warm, thick gruel might be the staple breakfast, bland perhaps by your standards, but warm, filling, and a universe away from gnawing on cold, dry biscuit. Later in the day, you might smell bread baking, perhaps dense, dark loaves made from rye or barley flour, baked in embers or on flat stones near the fire. The taste would be hearty, maybe slightly sour from sourdough techniques, the texture substantial and filling. Dairy products, largely absent at sea, play a more significant role ashore, especially during the warmer months when animals are milking well. You might taste fresh milk from cows or goats, still warm perhaps. Butter would be churned, a laborious process yielding a rich, fatty spread highly valued for adding flavor and calories. Simple cheeses might be made, pressed, and stored for later use. And skyr, that thick, tangy fermented milk product similar to yogurt, would be a common sight, eaten plain or perhaps flavored with precious honey or seasonal berries. The cycle of the seasons dictates much of the fresh produce. In the spring and summer, you might gather wild greens or cultivate small garden plots near the longhouse, yielding hardy vegetables like cabbages, onions, or peas for a brief period. Autumn brings the harvest of root vegetables, turnips, carrots, parsnips, earthy, robust flavors that could be stored in cool pits or cellars to last through part of the winter. Wild berries, bilberries, raspberries, lingon berries would be gathered eagerly in late summer and autumn, their sweetness a rare treat, perhaps eaten fresh or preserved in honey or dried for later use. In some regions, hardy apples might be harvested. Compared to your year-round global supermarket supply, the selection seems incredibly limited and fleeting. But to someone accustomed to sea rations, even a simple boiled turnip or a handful of fresh berries would feel like a feast. Meat and fish consumption also differs ashore. While salted and dried fish remain important preserved foods, especially for winter, fresh fish might come from nearby rivers or lakes. Domestic livestock, sheep, goats, pigs, cattle, poultry like chickens and geese, are raised for meat, milk, wool, and eggs. Meat wouldn't necessarily be an everyday occurrence for everyone. Animals were valuable assets. But communal feasts, perhaps celebrating harvests or religious festivals, would likely feature roasted or boiled meat, perhaps a whole pig turning on a spit over the fire, or a large cauldron bubbling with a hearty stew made from mutton or beef, flavored with wild herbs and thickened with barley. Hunted game, depending on the region and season, could supplement the diet. Deer, elk, wild boar, game birds providing welcome additions. However, the specter of winter, the hunger gap before the next harvest, looms large. Thus, preservation techniques remain absolutely crucial on land, just as at sea, but with slightly different methods sometimes employed alongside salting and drying. Meat and fish would be smoked extensively in dedicated smokehouses or simply hung high in the smoky rafters of the longhouse, the wood smoke slowly curing the flesh and imparting a deep flavor while inhibiting spoilage. Root vegetables are carefully stored in cool, dark places. Grains must be kept dry and protected from vermin. Fermentation might be used for some vegetables. Ensuring enough preserved food was stored to last through the long, dark, cold winter months until the next growing season was a primary, overriding concern for every household. Imagine sharing a meal in the longhouse, perhaps gathered on the benches around the central hearth as evening draws in. A large, steaming cauldron of stew is ladled into wooden bowls. Chunks of the dense bread are torn off to dip into the broth. Maybe there's some cheese, or a side of preserved fish. It's simple, communal, eaten with knives and hands. It's still basic by your luxurious modern standards, lacking spices, refined ingredients, and endless choice. But compared to the cold, dry, salty, monotonous fare of the longship, this warm, shared meal, using ingredients wrested from the surrounding land through hard labor and careful husbandry, feels like genuine comfort, a connection to place and season utterly absent on the open ocean. Yet, underlying it all is the constant awareness that this sufficiency is hard-won and precarious, dependent on successful harvests, healthy livestock, and diligent preservation against the lean times to come. And so, our journey through the hypothetical reality of your first day, or perhaps weeks, as a Viking draws towards its close. We've navigated treacherous seas, endured crushing confinement, tasted the grim sustenance of survival, and perhaps even brushed against the sharp edge of conflict. As the sounds of the imagined longhouse or the endless ocean begin to fade, let's take a moment together to reflect on what this experience, stripped bare of saga-fueled romance and Hollywood gloss, truly entailed, especially for someone plucked directly from the comforts and assumptions of the modern world. Think back to that very first moment of waking. Not in a warm bed, but on a rough, damp pile of straw or hides, perhaps on the hard, rolling deck of the longship itself. Remember the immediate assault on your senses, the pervasive chill seeping into your bones, the coarse texture of unwashed wool against your skin, the inescapable proximity of other bodies, the complex, often unpleasant aroma of unwashed humanity mixed with tar, salt, smoke, and bilge water. Remember the lack of privacy, the absence of personal space as you understand it, the constant awareness of being just one body crammed amongst many in an often wet, always exposed environment. This wasn't a brief discomfort. It was the baseline state of existence for much of the time. Recall the food, if such a word truly captures the reality. The relentless diet of incredibly salty, rock-hard dried fish that had to be laboriously chewed. The dense, bland ship's biscuit potentially riddled with weevils, both engineered solely for preservation, not pleasure. Remember the gnawing monotony, the desperate craving for simple, fresh tastes, the reduction of eating to a purely functional, often unpleasant chore. And the water, scarce, often stale, tasting of the wooden barrel it was stored in, strictly rationed alongside perhaps weak, sour ale, leaving you in a perpetual state of mild dehydration exacerbated by the salty food and hard labor. Compare that for just a moment to the effortless variety, quality, and abundance you expect from every meal and drink today. Consider the relentless demands on your physical body, the constant exposure to the elements on the open deck, the biting wind, the soaking rain, the burning sun, the penetrating fog, with virtually no shelter, the backbreaking labor required just to keep the vessel operational, the endless, smelly task of bailing bilge water, the meticulous checking and mending of ropes and sails, the exhausting, blister-inducing hours spent pulling a heavy oar when the wind failed. Remember the pervasive seasickness, the rudimentary hygiene, the constant companionship of lice and fleas, the utter lack of sanitation that made even basic bodily functions a challenge. Your body, accustomed to climate control, ergonomic support, and modern hygiene, would likely protest violently against this constant physical stress and discomfort. And beyond the physical, think of the mental and psychological strain. The crushing boredom of long days staring at an unchanging horizon, punctuated only by demanding chores or inadequate rest. The lack of stimulation, the absence of the constant information and entertainment streams you rely on, the anxiety of navigating without instruments, trusting subtle signs and human experience, the profound fear of getting lost in the vast emptiness, the ever-present risk of sudden, violent storms capable of tearing the ship apart, the chilling possibility of shipwreck in icy waters, the constant awareness of your vulnerability to illness and injury, with no real medical care available beyond the most basic and often brutal interventions, the rigid social hierarchy, the need for absolute obedience, the potential for friction and conflict simmering just beneath the surface in the cramped quarters. And, if your voyage involved raiding, the added terror and moral complexity of preparing for and potentially engaging in violence, witnessing its brutal consequences firsthand, even when focused solely on the risks to your own group. This, then, begins to approach the reality that likely awaited someone thrust into that world. Not a glorious adventure of horned helmets and easy plunder, but a life lived constantly on the edge, defined by physical hardship, relentless labor, gnawing uncertainty, and dangers both natural and man-made. It was a world that demanded incredible resilience, toughness, practical skill, and a mindset profoundly different from our own. As we've journeyed through these hypothetical experiences, the initial premise, that you likely wouldn't last a day, perhaps feels less like hyperbole and more like a sober assessment of the immense gulf separating our modern lives from the harsh realities faced by those who sailed these northern seas over 1,000 years ago, having journeyed, even hypothetically, through the relentless catalog of hardships that constituted daily life for a Viking on voyage. The physical misery, the gnawing uncertainty, the constant brush with danger. A question naturally arises. How? How did they not only endure this existence but often thrive, expanding their reach across vast distances, leaving an indelible mark on history? If it was so overwhelmingly difficult for someone like you, plucked from modern comfort, what made them capable of navigating this brutal reality? The answer isn't a single factor, but a complex interplay of environmental pressure, physical adaptation, highly developed skills, and a cultural mindset profoundly different from our own. Firstly, consider the environment that shaped them. Scandinavia, their homeland, while beautiful, could be harsh and demanding. Much of the terrain is rocky, mountainous, heavily forested, with relatively limited areas suitable for productive agriculture, especially with their farming technology. Winters were long, dark, and cold. Resources could be scarce. This challenging environment naturally selected for resourcefulness, adaptability, and resilience. It also pushed them towards the sea, for fishing, for trade, and yes, for raiding, as a means to supplement local resources, acquire wealth, and find new opportunities. Hardship wasn't an occasional inconvenience, it was woven into the fabric of their lives, the baseline against which life was measured. What seems extreme to you was, to a significant degree, their normal. Secondly, there's the matter of sheer physical adaptation and toughness. Unlike you, hypothetically dropped into this world, they grew up in it. From childhood, they would be accustomed to colder temperatures, simpler diets, demanding physical labor. Their bodies were likely hardened from birth, developing a natural resilience to conditions that would quickly incapacitate someone raised in centrally heated homes with abundant food and minimal physical exertion. Constant outdoor activity, farming, hunting, building, playing, developed strong physiques. The daily grind of chores, whether ashore or at sea, maintained a high level of functional strength and endurance throughout their lives. They didn't need gym memberships. Life itself was a constant workout. Thirdly, survival demanded an impressive array of practical skills, honed through necessity and passed down through generations. Their shipbuilding skills, for instance, were extraordinary, producing vessels perfectly adapted to their needs, swift, seaworthy, capable of navigating both open oceans and shallow rivers. Their seamanship was equally remarkable, navigating vast distances without modern instruments, relying on that deep, intuitive understanding of the sun, stars, wind, waves, and birds we discussed. Ashore, they possessed the skills of farming, animal husbandry, blacksmithing, woodworking, weaving, all essential for a largely self-sufficient existence. And of course, for many, there were the highly developed skills of warfare, proficiency with axe, spear, sword, and shield, tactical awareness, the ability to fight effectively both individually and as part of a cohesive shield wall. These weren't hobbies. They were essential tools for survival, status, and prosperity in their world. Perhaps most crucial, however, was their cultural mindset and system of values. Viking society, particularly during the height of their expansion, often placed great emphasis on personal honor, reputation, bravery, and loyalty to one's leader and comrades. The concept of drengskaper, encompassing manliness, valor, and nobility of spirit. Seeking wealth and glory through daring voyages and successful raids was a primary path to achieving status and renown. While not every Norseman was a Viking raider, this warrior ethos permeated the culture. There was likely a greater acceptance of risk and hardship, perhaps even a degree of fatalism, a belief in wired, or fate, that allowed them to face danger with a stoicism that seems shocking to modern sensibilities, focused so intensely on safety and longevity. Death in battle might even be seen as preferable to a quiet decline, offering the potential promise of Valhalla for elite warriors. This worldview, emphasizing reputation earned through action and acceptance of risk, provided a powerful psychological framework for enduring the immense challenges they faced. So, why could they do it? Because their environment demanded it. Their bodies were conditioned for it. Their hands possessed the necessary skills, and their minds were shaped by a culture that valued strength, loyalty, reputation, and a perhaps fatalistic acceptance of hardship as intrinsic parts of life. They weren't superhuman, but they were products of a time and place that forged extraordinary resilience out of necessity. Understanding this context doesn't excuse the brutality they sometimes inflicted, but it helps explain their remarkable capacity to endure conditions that seem almost impossible to us today. As our exploration of the Viking world concludes, let yourself fully return to your present surroundings. Feel the comfortable surface beneath you. Notice the steady temperature of the room. Perhaps take a sip of clean, easily accessible water. After immersing ourselves, even just in imagination, into the harsh realities of life over a millennium ago, the contrast with our own daily existence becomes incredibly stark, almost overwhelming. It prompts a moment of reflection, perhaps even a profound sense of gratitude for the myriad comforts and securities we so often take completely for granted. Consider your health, your physical well-being. When was the last time you genuinely feared dying from a small cut becoming infected, or worried that a simple cough might develop into fatal pneumonia with no effective treatment available? You live in an age of antibiotics, antiseptics, vaccines, sterile medical procedures, and readily available professional health care. Contrast that with the Viking sailor, whose greatest medical hope might be a poultice of moss or the grim ordeal of cauterization, where infection was a constant, often lethal, shadow following even minor injuries. Think about basic sanitation, flushing toilets, running hot and cold water, sewage systems, regular bathing. Compare that to the primitive hygiene conditions we explored, the constant proximity to human and animal waste, the lack of clean water for washing, the ever-present fleas and lice. Our baseline expectation of cleanliness is a luxury unimaginable for most people throughout history. Think about the food you eat, the water you drink. You likely have access to an astonishing variety of foods from around the globe, available year-round, kept fresh through refrigeration and sophisticated supply chains. Food safety standards protect you from many contaminants. Clean drinking water is effortlessly available on demand. Now, recall the Viking diet, particularly at sea. The relentless monotony of heavily salted, rock-hard preserved rations, the constant struggle against spoilage, the potential for parasitic contamination, the strictly limited, often unpalatable water supply. The sheer effort involved in simply acquiring, preserving, and consuming enough calories to survive was immense, whereas for many of us, obtaining food is often more a matter of choice and convenience than a desperate necessity. Consider your shelter, your home. You likely live in a space with solid walls, weatherproof windows, insulation, reliable heating and cooling systems, offering protection from the elements, privacy, and personal space. Contrast that with the smoky, communal longhouse, often shared with animals, or the completely open, exposed deck of the longship, where occupants were perpetually at the mercy of wind, rain, cold, and waves. The simple comfort of being reliably warm, dry, and having a private space to retreat to is a fundamental difference in our lived experience. Reflect on your personal safety and security. While modern life certainly has its dangers, most of us live with a level of background security unimaginable in the Viking Age. We rely on established legal systems, law enforcement, emergency services. Travel, while not without risks, is extraordinarily safe and fast compared to their perilous voyages in fragile ships across dangerous seas, facing storms, navigational uncertainties, and the constant threat of hostile encounters. The pervasive background level of violence, whether from raiding, feuds, or simply a less structured legal environment, is vastly different from the relative peace most of us experience daily. Think, too, about information and connection. You have instant access to virtually the sum of human knowledge via the internet. You can communicate with people across the globe in seconds. You are constantly connected, constantly stimulated. Contrast that with the profound isolation of a long sea voyage, the slow spread of news, the reliance on memory and oral tradition for knowledge and entertainment, the limited understanding of the wider world. Our lives are cushioned by layers upon layers of technology, infrastructure, scientific knowledge, and social systems designed to enhance comfort, safety, and longevity. We have largely outsourced the physical labor of survival through mechanization and automation. These cushions are so pervasive that we often forget they exist, like the air we breathe. But journeying back, even in thought, to a time like the Viking Age, where those cushions were entirely absent, forces us to confront just how different, how much harder, how much more precarious life truly was. It perhaps allows us to appreciate not just the remarkable resilience of those who endured it, but also the incredible, often invisible privileges of our own time. Privileges built upon centuries of struggle, innovation, and the hard-won lessons of the past. So, as we fully return from this immersive dive into the often brutal realities of Viking life, having contrasted it starkly with our own existence, it's perhaps worth adding a final layer to our perspective. While we've focused intently and necessarily on the immense hardships, the daily grind, the pervasive dangers that defined so much of their experience, the cold, the hunger, the fear, the sheer effort of survival, it would be incomplete to remember the Viking Age solely through this lens. Because, paradoxically, this era of profound hardship was also an age of incredible dynamism, expansion, and lasting influence. The very people enduring these conditions were simultaneously shaping the course of European history and beyond in remarkable ways. Their reputation as raiders, while often deserved, overshadows their significant roles as explorers and settlers. Driven by the pressures and opportunities we've discussed, Norse seafarers displayed breathtaking courage and navigational skill, pushing the boundaries of the known world. They settled the Faroe Islands, Iceland, Greenland, establishing communities in challenging North Atlantic environments. Leif Erikson and his contemporaries reached the shores of North America, Vinland, centuries before Columbus, demonstrating maritime capabilities far ahead of their time, even if those settlements ultimately didn't last. This spirit of exploration, undertaken in the same open, fragile longships we've imagined ourselves suffering in, speaks volumes about their ambition and tolerance for risk. They were also prolific traders, weaving extensive networks across vast distances. Viking merchants navigated not only the North Sea and the Baltic, but also the great rivers of Eastern Europe, establishing trade routes, the famous Varangian routes, connecting Scandinavia all the way down to Byzantium, Constantinople, and the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. Along these routes flowed goods like luxurious furs from the north, amber from the Baltic, walrus ivory, honey, timber, and, yes, tragically, slaves captured in raids or acquired through trade. In return came silver, silks, glassware, spices, wine, fine pottery, and weapons from the south and east. These networks fostered cultural exchange alongside commerce, linking disparate parts of the world in ways that had profound long-term consequences. You can trace their presence in the coin hoards found across Europe and beyond, testament to their far-reaching economic activity. Their impact on the political and cultural landscape of Europe was also immense. In England, their settlements led to the establishment of the Danelaw, leaving a lasting imprint on language, law, and place names. In France, Viking settlers were granted land that became Normandy, the land of the Northmen, whose descendants would later conquer England in 1066. In Eastern Europe, Varangian Vikings played a crucial role in the formation of the Kievan Rus' state, the precursor to modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. They established key trading towns like Dublin in Ireland, York in England, Novgorod, and Kiev in the east, shaping urban development. Their influence echoes even today in our language. Many common English words like ski, skin, leg, window, husband, law, berserk have Old Norse origins. And despite the often rugged nature of their daily lives, the Viking Age also produced remarkable artistry and craftsmanship. Surviving examples of their metalwork, intricate brooches, pendants, sword hilts, display incredible skill and sophisticated design, often featuring complex interlace patterns and stylized animal motifs, characteristic of styles like boar or gelling. Their wood carving, seen on ship prows, sledges, and stave churches, could be equally elaborate and powerful. They developed their own unique runic alphabet, used for inscriptions on stones, wood, and bone, leaving behind enigmatic messages and memorials. And although mostly written down later, their rich oral tradition produced complex poetry. The Eddas preserving mythological and heroic tales, and intricate skaldic poetry praising chieftains and recounting deeds, offering glimpses into their worldview, values, and literary sensibilities. Acknowledging this complex legacy, the explorer alongside the raider, the trader alongside the warrior, the craftsman alongside the survivor, doesn't diminish the harsh realities we've focused on. If anything, it perhaps makes their resilience even more remarkable. It suggests that the same toughness, adaptability, and risk-taking spirit forged by hardship also fueled their expansion, their creativity, and their lasting impact on the world. Understanding the full picture requires us to hold both the grim reality of daily life and the dynamism of their achievements in view simultaneously. It's a reminder that history is rarely simple, and the human spirit is capable of extraordinary things even, perhaps especially in the face of profound adversity. And so, our long journey back through time, exploring the stark realities beneath the Viking myth, finally comes to a quiet close. Let the echoes of the creaking longship, the crackling longhouse fire, the distant northern seas gently fade now. Hold on to the quiet, perhaps the sense of perspective, maybe just the feeling of comfortable stillness you have right now. The past, with all its harshness and resilience, eventually gives way to the present moment. Thank you, truly, for joining me on this exploration tonight. I hope it offered some interesting thoughts to drift away with. Wherever you are listening, may the rest of your night be peaceful and your sleep deep. Until next time, take care and sleep well.